Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1330 of the War News stream. And today we have very big news that U.S. officials have ordered a covert CIA intervention in Venezuela. It's supposed to be secret, but now everybody knows about it. Also, the U.S. has declared a trade war against China, and Ukraine is warned of major Russian escalation in Belarus. And we have very big news tonight, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments from quite literally every single region around the globe again today. As we have been able to hear, the United States of America, through the Office of the President, has publicly stated that the super-secret U.S. Special Operations campaign, which is now being launched as a part of the CIA and multiple other governmental agencies, is now being conducted inside of Venezuela, with multiple U.S. agencies conducting top-secret infiltrations into the country that we now know about here in the public. We have also been able to hear at the exact same time that 3 U.S. B-52 Stratofortress bombers have been spotted off the coast of Venezuela today. This led to a significant stir inside of Venezuela, and also the scrambling of several F-16 fighter jets to attempt to conduct an interception of the B-52 Stratofortress bombers that were flying over the coast of Venezuela not too far away. We have also heard an additional statement that apparently at least one strike on a Colombian drug cartel boat has been conducted in the midst of the campaign, and either was mistaken for a Venezuelan narco vessel or was decided to be attacked nonetheless. We have also heard that the United States is looking at conducting strikes on land inside of Venezuela here soon, once again making it incredibly clear that the United States is moving towards attempting to provoke the Venezuelans as much as they possibly can. In the meantime, we have also been able to hear of other major developments inside of Europe, as the Ukrainian armed forces on the Pokrovsk battlefield have managed to push the Russian Federation back on the northern flank once again over the course of the day. This is coming at the same time as further unification efforts have been conducted by the Russian Federation and Belarus, and we've also seen that the Ukrainians have started to raise the alarm that significant actions are occurring that are considered escalatory. In the meantime, the United States of America has approved the sale of Tomahawk cruise missiles to the state of Ukraine and are stating that they're planning on those sales being conducted here within the very near future, while simultaneously, the United States is also declaring an official trade war with the People's Republic of China as of today. The People's Republic of China has continued its escalatory actions against the Republic of the Philippines by setting up some form of buoys around the area of the Scarborough Shoal, while North Korea is getting assistance from the Russian Federation in building submarines, and South Korea has noted that multiple new defenses have been set up by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea along the demilitarized zone. Not only that, inside of the Taliban Pakistan war, we have been able to hear that a ceasefire, a 48-hour long one at that, has finally been achieved by the two sides. However, it does appear that the Pakistanis have been able to deal some significant blows to the Taliban during that very period. And we've also heard that the Republic of India, as a side note, has given an assurance to the United States of America that they will not be conducting any further trade with the Russian Federation on the purchases of oils. The State of Israel has now insisted today that there are, as a matter of fact, more bodies that Hamas is in possession of than claimed, and that this may lead to some sort of a degradation of the peace deal and a continuation of the war, as we are also hearing that new war plans are already being prepared by the Israelis. What a coincidence. We have also heard outside of that the Russian Federation has taken another major hit today inside of Ufa at an oil refinery, and a Russian aircraft happened to drop a 1,000-pound bomb into the middle of Saratov that luckily did not go off as it had not been armed yet, but it just happened to fall right off the bottom of the aircraft. We have also heard that the Novorossiysk, the ill-fated submarine with the diesel leak, has somehow finally made it into the Baltics today, and we've also heard of an appearance of another Russian Kilo-class submarine in the area of the Baltic Sea as well, which is being observed heavily by the Swedish Navy. We have a huge amount of news to cover today, and these are just the largest stories of the day. This is not every single story from the largest to the smallest that we have, and of course, we're going to make sure to cover every single major story that we just talked about, and all of the smaller ones that we have in between. But suffice it to say, like largely every other day of the week these days, there was absolutely no shortage of major news coming out from around the entirety of the world, and we are going to be making sure to get into every single piece of it, starting with our largest stories first, and then moving our way on through the news into the smaller stories through the night. So, with that in mind, we are going to be starting off inside of the Americas today, as we have been able to hear of significant developments and direct U.S. involvement on the ground inside of Venezuela, per the office of the President of the United States. This is something, for this reason, that we can confirm with 100% certainty. Many of y'all know that here on the Enforcer channel, we have been analyzing the possibility of U.S. ground operations being conducted inside of Venezuela by special forces and other governmental agencies of the United States, including the CIA. The last time we analyzed this on air, we actually stated that U.S. forces based out of Trinidad and Tobago, most likely using the 160th SOAR, Special Operations Aviation Regiment of the U.S. Army, would be able to conduct deep penetration raids into the nation of Venezuela, dropping off special forces operatives and possibly other operatives, including those of the CIA, to be able to conduct actions inside of Venezuela to either attempt to destabilize the government or to set up some sort of a attempted uprising or coup d'etat against the current existent government. It actually appears that that is highly likely the case at this point, as the President of the United States today, in a press conference, actually stated that they are officially conducting covert CIA actions at a minimum inside of Venezuela, per the New York Times. An additional statement was also made when asked by the press whether or not the CIA had the authorization to kill Maduro. The president then stated, "I don't want to answer a question like that," largely cutting the question off and then moving on to further ones. Nevertheless, this is a full-scale confirmation at this point that the United States of America has been, at least for some time, involved directly on the ground inside of the nation of Venezuela. And there are a wide myriad of operations that the CIA and Special Operations Forces could be conducting inside of the country at this point that is supposed to be super secret, but now everyone in the public knows about it because of the statements by the President of the United States today. Still, the statement doesn't really give away a great deal, at least in terms of operational security, about where exactly these Special Forces teams are and what they are doing inside of the nation of Venezuela, or for that matter, the CIA operatives, which were officially stated as of today. But one thing is quite clear: the United States is not looking to de-escalate the situation, but is looking to further escalate the situation with the Venezuelans, as the President of the United States also stated that he is currently looking at strikes against Venezuelan cartels on land. To lay out the lay of the land, at least on the strategic and diplomatic level, let me explain to y'all what we are seeing right now. So, with this in mind, here's what we know. One, we claim that Maduro and his government are an extension of the cartel. There is currently a $50 million bounty out on Maduro issued by the United States of America for his capture alive due to his involvement in narco-terrorist operations. So largely, we do view the Venezuelan government as an official extension of the cartels within this region. This largely means that when we speak, at least on a U.S. official level at this point, about curbing cartel operations inside of Venezuela, the government is not out of reach, as we do consider it an extension of the cartel and largely a sub-department or an agency of the existing cartels within the country. Secondly, with the existence of the CIA operatives inside of Venezuela being confirmed, and also the general confirmation along with that multiple special forces, including those agents of the CIA, are currently involved on the ground in Venezuela, we are very clearly understanding at this point that there are preparatory operations being made. Either they're collecting intelligence, a preparation or a preparatory operation to ensure that U.S. strikes will be as successful as possible when they are conducted, or they are currently trying to conduct assassinations against high-level officials inside of the Venezuelan government, and while we have not been able to see any of those being conducted yet, they still could be either actively attempting to assassinate those officials, or gathering enough intelligence and information to allow for the United States Armed Forces or for some sort of a special operations team to conduct the assassination hit directly against those Venezuelan government officials. We also understand that listening posts, general photography and pictures, and also multiple other operations could be made, along with stirring up public dissent against the government and possibly trying to buy off support in the opposition against the Maduro government by buying them outright with hard cash, a similar tactic that was seen inside of Afghanistan in the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, where CIA operatives conducted the very same operations to buy off support against the existent Taliban government in Afghanistan, and a similar sort of a tactic could be conducted by the CIA against the Maduro regime inside of Venezuela. We have also been able to hear additionally that there is a large amount of U.S. forces within the area, including the USS Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, multiple Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, along with a Ticonderoga-class missile cruiser, the USS Lake Erie, a littoral combat ship, a Freedom-class littoral combat ship, along with several F-35Bs of the United States Marine Corps, an entire air wing of them, 10 F-35s, and the entire 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, the 22nd MU, which is currently based out of Puerto Rico. We also understand that the 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment of the U.S. Army is currently based somewhere out of Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States is still exploring the opportunity of basing U.S. forces to some extent inside of the island of Grenada, which is also incredibly close to Venezuela. We have also heard today that the United States of America has conducted significant flights of B-52 Stratofortresses near to the area of the coastline of Venezuela and their airspace, as several B-52Hs were seen around the area and were conducting orbits, including Bunny 1, Bunny 2, and Bunny number 3. It does appear that
those some deadly bunnies right there. I'll tell you what an interesting name for those aircraft. But also, it took a little flyby by Cuba too. Notice that it sort of went right by the side of Cuba on the way to Venezuela.
It really did, actually. That was an interesting note that they did take a little bit of a hop, skip, and a jump right through this area, this strait between the Yucatan Peninsula and the most western area of Cuba, which was a little bit interesting note, and they pretty much skirted all the way along Cuba on their way down, possibly trying to either avoid Cuban airspace, and this was the easiest path to take, or trying to send some sort of a message to the Cubans about what could be coming their way, considering they really have no way to even defend against a B-52 if it was carpet bombing them, which most people would actually have a defense to these days. Still, the United States of America has conducted a large air presence in the area today as a result of the flights of B-52H Stratofortresses, and also really quickly, folks, I do want to say this, that was probably the quickest and easiest flight path to take, considering that those B-52 bombers did take off from Barksdale Air Force Base here in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is where most of the current operational B-52H Stratofortresses are currently based out of. So it's highly likely that that path was taken and it ended up skirting along a large part of the coastline of Cuba, because that would have been the most opportune route to take and the shortest one, instead of conducting a longer flight around Cuba and also Haiti and the Dominican Republic to the north, and then having to skirt directly across Puerto Rico and then down into the Eastern Caribbean. So it may have been, and of course there's two options here, there's never a clear answer to anything, it may have been to save on the amount of flight hours that these aircraft would be involved in, or it may have also been an additional show of force against the Cubans, one way or the other. We have also heard that as a response to this, the Venezuelans did panic and did mobilize F-16s, which were airborne, to respond to the B-52 flights that were outside of the country. According to information that we had gotten earlier in the day, Venezuelan F-16s were reportedly airborne from the El Libertador Air Base inside of Aragua. We were then later able to see one of these F-16s taking off from the airbase in Aragua in this clip right here.
Kind of interesting they're using F-16s to go after our aircraft, considering that the F-16 is an American-made fighter jet. That's sort of a strange thing that Venezuela is anti-U.S., but yet they use our fighter.
Yeah, I would have to say it is a fairly interesting deal. Funnily enough, they actually have a decent amount of F-16s in the Venezuelan Air Force, because before they went the whole Maduro route, they were actually largely somewhat American aligned, and then after they went the Maduro path, that's when we started to see that the Venezuelans started to get access to a larger amount of Chinese and Russian equipment like they have today. But if we take a look at the Venezuelan Air Force, just to show you all this right here really quickly, we can actually see, if we go down to the list of operational aircraft, they actually have only 3 F-16s. Only 3 of them.
Oh, wow.
I
bet they're having a hard time getting replacement parts for them, too, considering the U.S. is not on good terms with them.
I would have to assume probably so. I mean, it is interesting, folks, because I remember that they actually had a larger number of F-16s than this, at least in the past. I guess they retired a lot of them, because the last time I looked at these figures, it was a couple of years ago. But they also have 21 Su-30s, which is their most numerous multi-role aircraft that they have in their Air Force, although it's more so of an air superiority fighter than a true multi-role like we would have inside the United States. Still, it does appear that at least at the moment, the Venezuelans did respond with the limited number of F-16s that they had, flying them out towards the area of the B-52 bombers and generally conducting either some sort of an interdiction flight or a combat air patrol as a result of the arrival of the B-52s off of their coastline. A lot of people are looking at the situation at this moment, in the entire lens that we have at this point, and they're starting to wonder, what is the actual U.S. goal? And I also have to put out there a couple of additional facts that we already know of, so that we all can get all of the information in one spot tonight, and then make a decision off of this. The U.S. government has suspended all diplomatic talks with the Venezuelans, even with the proposed offer that is rumored that the Venezuelans are pretty much going to cut all ties with the Chinese and the Russians and pretty much become an American satellite economically. We have also seen that the Venezuelan government has continued to state that they will defend themselves to the last man, and they've been conducting significant mobilization and defensive operations in their country for the past few months as a result of these actions. The United States has been attacking and bombing narco-terrorist boats that are Venezuelan off of the coast of Venezuela, and are now stating, as a result of the lack of response by the Venezuelans, that they're now going to be moving on to direct airstrikes and attacks on land inside of Venezuela. With all of these facts considered at the base level, along with everything else that we've told you all about so far today, a lot of people are talking about what the United States is planning on doing inside of Venezuela. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So y'all might recall, we actually predicted this about a week ago, or actually a little over a week ago, actually. We had said and speculated that the CIA probably already has operatives well inside of Venezuela, and they're probably all over the place, either softening up the Venezuelans for invasion or doing some type of operations like that for reconnaissance. So it turns out we were actually right, because they've apparently been there, and they have been authorized officially by U.S. officials. So it's supposed to be a super secret operation that we've been told about. So that's a little bit interesting, but what is the objective? And 62% said to oust the Maduro regime by force, covertly that is, and 19% said to scare Maduro into compliance, and 13% said is to soften Venezuela for invasion. So I gotta admit, not a really good strategy here. We're basically blowing the lid on the covert CIA operation, at least the U.S. officials are, by saying that our goons are currently running around in Venezuela. That's a little bit of an interesting strategy. I've never really seen that one employed before, to tell people that a covert operation is underway on their soil. Seems a little bit interesting. Also quite a bad decision. But nonetheless, though, it's known about. It's an open secret now. So I would say ousting the Maduro regime by force, that is probably their main objective right now, and I would not be shocked if they're trying to cash in on that $50 million bounty that's currently on Maduro. So I think they're going after him. I'm with the 62%. I'm not sure about the invasion option. Still a little bit shaky on that one, but I am confident they're probably trying to oust Maduro and his buddies. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, One, it's a little bit interesting, like Matthew did say, that the super secret operation to infiltrate Venezuela and use our special forces as well as our CIA agents, which could be largely true to special forces as well, to slowly shift the situation in our favor in Venezuela and then announce that to the public is probably not the best idea, and generally goes against the whole idea of the entire situation being covert or the entire operation being covert. Nevertheless, one thing I will say is that the admittance of this sort of an operation in Venezuela would generally lead us to believe that the objective is to oust the Maduro regime by force. We generally have already been working off of that premise for a while here on the channel, and not only that, we predicted the arrival of special forces, whether they be CIA operatives or special forces themselves inside the country, for quite some time now. As a matter of fact, it was a good while ago when the 160th SOAR was spotted conducting helicopter flights near to Trinidad and Tobago that we largely stated that it was highly likely that insertion operations were being conducted by the Special Operations Forces of different forms of U.S. operatives and agents into the country to allow for either a gathering of critical intelligence and data directly from the ground, or to get people in place that can point a laser at a target and let a JDAM smack down right on top of that laser. There's also a load of other things that they could be doing. There's a million different things that CIA agents and the Special Forces could be conducting inside of Venezuela at the moment, but this pretty much confirms our analysis from about a week or two ago that that's exactly what's going on inside the country. With that in mind, we do not undertake significant operations like these without some sort of an end goal, and considering that we're making it incredibly clear that we're going to be escalating the direct armed actions against Venezuela and now conducting strikes on land, along with the fact that there are Special Forces operatives inside of the country at this point, it is becoming wildly clear, based on the picture that's forming in the public, that we are planning on ousting the Maduro regime or conducting a significant armed action against Venezuela, with or without overthrowing Maduro, one or the other, and that is incredibly clear. I would have to say that at this point, we're pretty much just ticking down the clock to seeing that a full-blown war between the United States and Venezuela kicks off. And I have a feeling that that cannot be that much longer from this point. Venezuela is pretty much backed into a corner. There isn't really any way for them to get any form of foreign support, and the United States has continued to escalate the situation to where they either have to respond or the end result will generally end up being the same. We're either going to keep escalating until we get to the point that we conduct an armed invasion in Venezuela and overthrow the Maduro regime, or conduct some sort of a CIA coup to overthrow the Maduro regime, or the Venezuelans are going to attempt to defend themselves by firing at the United States, which will give us the proper diplomatic justification to state that the Maduro regime is definitely connected to the narco-terrorist groups that we are attacking inside of the country, because they are now conducting an armed defense, not of Venezuela, but of those cartels that we are attempting to attack. Therefore, for that reason, we are now able to go after Venezuela as a sponsor of terrorism, as an international diplomatic stance, and that's one that largely would stand incredibly well, at least for Western aligned countries and those that generally find themselves down the middle. Not necessarily Western aligned, but not Chinese aligned either. I would say that that's a very high likelihood at this point, and I'd also have to add to all of y'all that if you start to see further increases of U.S. military activities within this area, that's not going to be unexpected at this point, without a doubt. It is going to be guaranteed that there will be increased U.S. military operations in the Eastern Caribbean as a result of this, and directly against Venezuela as well. I would also say to y'all that it's probably going to be within the next 2 weeks that we see the first direct ground strikes or airstrikes in Venezuela happen on land, as that will be the next step in escalations. It doesn't really appear that the boat attacks are getting a response from the Venezuelans, at least at this point, so they're going to escalate and conduct ground attacks on Venezuela, and then hope that eventually the Venezuelans will respond to that instead. It does appear that a lot of people are also talking about the U.S. sending the B-52 bombers off the coast of Venezuela today, and what the United States largely meant by those actions as well. And Matthew, what are people thinking about those, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so we did see the B-52 bombers go right next to Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, which is a very symbolic thing to do from the U.S. perspective. And also, Venezuela responded by sending their F-16s airborne, at least one of them of their fleet of 3. So what was the goal for the U.S. to do this? And it looks like the poll is almost evenly split. 42% said it was a test run for an aerial assault against Venezuela, while 42% also said it was merely for intimidation, and 11% said they were just sightseeing. That's all they were doing, was going down there for a nice look at the coast. And I would say personally, I think it was merely for intimidation. I think it's very clearly that reason. These things took off from Shreveport inside of Louisiana, and they flew all the way down past Cuba and all the way down 100 miles away from Caracas, merely to let Maduro know that he is within reach of the United States. So I'm with the 43%. I think it was merely for intimidation. And granted, this was a very expensive intimidation tactic, because they had to fly all the way from Louisiana down there to Venezuela, and then they're going to fly, I assume, all the way back. So it was intimidation, but at what cost? And also, we already have a ton of boats and ships around the area, so I would say Maduro's already scared enough, but I guess the B-52s were a little added cherry on top, I guess you could say. But Enforcer, what say you?
The B-52s are what we call the spice of life, in the fact that they make living very spicy and very hard to achieve. But beyond that, I would have to say that I would be with the 45%. It clearly was for intimidation. I would not expect that U.S. B-52 bombers would be used in any heavy form to conduct strikes against Venezuela. The B-52s, if they were used to conduct strikes against Venezuela, would pretty much leverage the same sort of firepower that any of the U.S. naval vessels within the region currently have as well, which is pretty much just cruise missiles. B-52s do not conduct carpet bombing operations any longer. B-52s, in their modern air war doctrine, use only standoff weapons, meaning that these B-52s, a lot like the Russian bombers you see in Russia, would fly several hundred miles or, nearly 1,000 miles away from their target, and they would just start dropping off cruise missiles out there. Those cruise missiles would then fly to their targets and slam right into them. Generally, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to send B-52s on that sort of an operation, as the U.S. Navy could generally conduct those operations on their own with the amount of Tomahawks that they'll have available at any given moment inside the region. So I have a feeling that that was most likely for intimidation, because it seems that the current administration considers aircraft to be the most intimidating sort of a symbol that we have against other countries. The B-2 flyover over Putin in Alaska, the B-2 flyover here, there, and everywhere else, including the one over Iran where we actually bombed them, and now this one with the B-52s flying off the coast visibly seen. So I'd have a feeling that this is most likely some sort of an intimidation tactic rather than anything, as I would highly doubt that they would ever use a B-52 bomber in any sort of a bombing operation against the Venezuelans, and that would most likely be left up to the Navy alone. But
I wonder why. I wonder why they didn't send the B-2 stealth bombers down there, because that seems to be the president's favorite right now, is to send the B-2s around. That's like the big bad boogeyman of the bomber fleet right now, is the B-2s, which is a pretty old aircraft actually, but that seems to be the favorite. But I guess they wanted to switch it up a little bit. I guess they've overused the B-2, so they sent the B-52 down there instead to go intimidate them. Honestly, I would say between the two, I think the B-52 is probably as intimidating, if not a slightly more intimidating than even the B-2, at least in my opinion.
I'll be honest with you, the B-52 is a pretty scary aircraft, especially when you consider that it can carry, I think, over a dozen ALCMs on a single aircraft. That's a fairly intimidating sort of a thing to think about on the conventional side of things. None of our B-52s, by the way, folks, are nuclear capable any longer. All of them have lost their nuclear capable status, so they can only use conventional standoff weaponry. So just to put that out there, these do not pose a nuclear threat to the Venezuelans by any degree. And I also see a lot of people talking about what we are doing in Venezuela, and many of y'all will know, and of course I've got to speak about it as far as American interests go. Many of y'all know that we're not really a big fan of the U.S. conducting any actions against Venezuela currently, and while I definitely do see a strong case for U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, I do not see it at this present day and moment right now. Once again, like I've said multiple times, this is something that we could deal with 5 to 7 years in the future, and the situation would end up the same as it is right now. However, when speaking about the Venezuelans, we do have to understand something, and this is something that a lot of people do not get when they talk about foreign policy. Foreign policy is inherently unfair. We do not give the same sort of leeway to our enemies that we give to ourselves. I see some people saying that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the same thing that the U.S. is doing to Venezuela. One, that's just generally not even true on the face of things. Two, if it is true, even if it is, I have to tell y'all, unfortunately, that's how foreign policy works. If you think it's fair, then you're doing foreign policy all wrong. We are supposed to be, in foreign policy, saying that every action that the United States of America does is justified for our national defense. And whenever our enemies do something that is justified for their national defense, we denounce it and say that it's absolutely heinous and they're equivalent to the devil. That's how foreign policy works. You never really get anywhere being fair in foreign policy, and historically that's always been the case. But generally with what we're doing in Venezuela, a lot of people have been saying that it has to do with the oil that is existing in Venezuela, and I have to tell you that that's not necessarily the case. Currently, Venezuela is not a large producer of crude oil. They do, however, have massive underground deposits of oil that have not been accessed yet, which does have a large energy potential within them. However, that energy potential has never been tapped. And when we're speaking about the United States trying to control the current flow of oil, unrealized oil deposits that are not being extracted do not really play into the strategic picture all that much and generally play second fiddle to the oil that's already flowing and being extracted from the oil fields. When we are talking about the price of crude oil per barrel around the world right now, the only thing that matters is the amount of available crude oil that's being pumped out of the ground and shipped by ship or by pipeline every single day. So the unrealized oil fields that are not being extracted from have no impact on the flow of oil or the price that matter anywhere around the world. So it generally is not for that fact, as we have very little trade with the Venezuelans on their crude, and hardly anyone does because their crude oil is high sulfur content. High sulfur content crude oil is incredibly difficult to refine and process, and for that reason, a lot of countries would like to go with even other methods like oil sands, shale, and so on to be able to try and get their crude oil instead of having to deal with the extremely convoluted and difficult process of refining high sulfur content Venezuelan oil. However, what we're really trying to do in Venezuela is we are trying to curb Chinese influence. As many of you all have seen, the United States of America has been on an endless campaign since the new administration came into office on trying to curb or completely delete Chinese influence through Central and South America. Many of y'all will remember that the United States threatened to annex the Panama Canal Zone in Panama because of the rising Chinese influence inside of the country, which actually was true. There is a large presence, at least at the time, economically, inside of the Republic of Panama. That actually forced the Panamanians to pretty much sever all economic relations with the People's Republic of China and largely shift pretty much entirely economically back towards the United States of America, ensuring that the country is economically tethered to us, and for that reason will have indefinite access to the Panama Canal in every situation. Now with Venezuela, we do know that while those unrealized oil fields that are not being extracted from do not affect the price of oil or the flow of oil on a day-to-day basis, we do know that the Chinese are currently investing and do have a drilling rig in Lake Maracaibo here on the western side of Venezuela that is attempting to drill into one of those unrealized oil deposits and start extraction. That not only gets China access to this crappy high sulfur crude, but it also allows the Venezuelans to make money. And the more money that Venezuela makes as a result of Chinese financial ventures in their country, the more connected Venezuela becomes to the Chinese. Growing Chinese influence inside of South America is the end result. For that reason, that's why the United States is doing what we're doing right now. It has nothing to do necessarily with the cartels. Saying that we are going to try and deal with the cartels by taking over Venezuela or overthrowing Maduro is like saying my entire foot is frostbitten and has turned black and is falling off right now. So to fix that, we're going to take my pinky toe on that frostbitten foot and chop it off and hope that that fixes the frostbite. The cartels exist beyond the pinky toe. They exist in the whole foot that is Central and Northern South America, and because of that, there's no way to deal with the cartels just by dealing with Venezuela. You would have to deal with the entirety of Central and South America to even cause a dent, and still, they would just rise back out of the criminal underworld, which is where they exist, after the United States left. So there really isn't any way to deal with them in that form, and for that reason, the current publicly announced reasons for our actions against Venezuela do not really stand up to scrutiny, and the more plausible explanation would be the continued curbing of Chinese influence, a lot like we did with Panama earlier in the year. On top of that, we also were able to hear that apparently there was either some form of collateral or an intentional attack that was conducted against a Colombian vessel, as at least one U.S. military strike in the Caribbean over the last 2 months targeted Colombian nationals on a boat that had left from Colombia, according to 2 people briefed by the Pentagon about the strikes. So it appears that there may have been a Colombian vessel attacked in prior strikes that we've heard of and seen so far on the channel. We are just not sure which one is the Colombian vessel and why in the world it was hit by the United States. Whether or not the intelligence was faulty and we hit the wrong boat, or whether the intelligence was accurate and we decided to hit the boat anyways, is unclear. But one thing we can confirm is that apparently there is some sort of a Colombian boat that has now been involved in the situation over the prior months and has been hit and destroyed by U.S. forces in the past, now that we're getting that information today. A lot of people have also been talking about the continued claims that the U.S. will strike, that the United States striking a Venezuelan drug boat was actually not Venezuelan. It was, as a matter of fact, Colombian. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so this is a pretty interesting claim right here, and it's got people a little bit concerned that maybe the U.S. is not doing proper due process before they target and strike these drug boats, these alleged drug boats that are currently off the coast of Venezuela. Because we heard today the allegation that is that a U.S. strike apparently struck a Colombian drug boat instead of a Venezuelan cartel drug boat in one of these strikes. So, what are your thoughts about that? And 32% said it sounds likely to be true, while 26% said it sounds like a false story, and 28% said it could be a 50-50 chance it could go either way. So right now, this is according to anonymous sources, according to the article that we currently have. So take it with a grain of salt. We don't have anybody on the record saying this is the case. But what we're hearing so far is apparently the boat that was struck, or at least one of them, was carrying Colombians affiliated with a Colombian terrorist organization. And according to the allegation, the Pentagon was unable to determine the individual identities of each person on the boat before they struck them. So if that's true, that's a little bit concerning, because right now, apparently they did not have a positive identification before they struck those vessels, or at least one of the vessels, and it could have been people that were not identified properly. So that's a little bit concerning. But at the same time, though, if it was still a drug boat, I would say, it's within their right to strike it, but we don't really know all the details right now. And it sounds like it's a little bit more murky than previously thought, which sort of lends credibility to the idea that some people had in the chat that they're not properly identifying these people. So I'm going to say I'm with the 28%. It sounds like a 50-50 chance, and without somebody being on the record for it, it's kind of hard to say if this is true for a concrete fact, but it's a little bit concerning. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would also have to say that it's a 50-50 chance. We really don't know who the source was for this, and it could be that this is true information, or it could have been just a rumor that was passed around and then quickly dismissed due to an additional corroboration of intelligence that was had later that we haven't heard about. So I would generally have to say I'm also unsure on this one as well. I do see a lot of people talking about the current actions that the United States are conducting against the cartel boats in Venezuela, and I also see some people continuing to state that the actions are illegal. And generally, I have to say this to a lot of people that do not know this or do not understand this, possibly because they've never heard of this. Terrorist groups get the same protections that a group of pirates gets, which is none. If a group is suspected to be involved in terrorist operations and there is some reasonable suspicion that that group is involved in terrorist activities, it is generally legal by international law to engage and destroy those terrorist forces without any further delay. Terrorist forces are not treated as domestic citizens in international law, to where you have to go up with a boat on a megaphone and tell them to turn off the boat, hand over the keys, and give driver's license and proof of insurance. If they are suspected of being involved in some sort of terrorist operations, as the cartels have been declared terrorists by the United States of America, they can be engaged with and destroyed by any measures that the United States deems necessary, as that is how terrorist groups are dealt with, a lot like piracy is also dealt with in the same way. If you do not know, the Somalian pirates of the early 2000s and the late 2010s were dealt with in the same way. A Somalian fishing boat could be seen off of the coast, and if you all don't know, generally pirates and terrorists, or like the cartels for example, use fishing boats because why the hell would they be transporting drugs on a yacht? That wouldn't really make too much sense. They're trying to make a profit on this stuff, so it's obviously going to be cheap, so they're going to use the most cheap thing available, which is a fishing boat. If you see any evidence of weapons in that boat, or if you see any evidence of any sort of illegal contraband in the vessel, that pretty much gives you the reasonable suspicion to say this is either a pirate or it's a terrorist, and you can open fire without any regard for the safety or health of the persons on board the vessel, or for the sake of the vessel for that matter either. If you don't really want to see this sort of a thing happening, it's best generally to not be a terrorist or involved in any sort of piracy or illegal cartel operations. That's really the best way to go about it. I know a lot of people like to say that it's wrong to do this, But at the same time, I haven't seen anyone having any issues with the United States of America in the past conducting airstrikes against the Houthis, which also use fishing boats to attempt to board and seize commercial shipping inside the southern Red Sea. I've seen nobody make any exceptions to the Houthis, and if you watch the footage of us blowing up their fishing boats, it is pretty much impossible to tell if any of those guys are involved in Houthi forces or operations because the guns are sitting at the bottom of the boat where you can hardly see them, and you just see a whole bunch of guys standing around in a fishing boat going towards a larger shipping vessel out in the middle of the Red Sea. So once again, you can make the same claim there. Should the U.S. Navy go up to every single Houthi terrorist inside the southern Red Sea with a rib and a giant megaphone out going, "Stop, we need to ensure that you're terrorists before we fire on you," because we would be very sad if you weren't a terrorist. Generally, that's not going to happen. Probable cause would say that they're terrorists involved in terroristic operations, and as long as U.S. intelligence is able to say that with some reasonable suspicion, the strike will most likely be approved.
Well, I think what people's problem is with it, and honestly, I would say I personally have a problem with it myself, is we're not really getting a very clear answer from the government as to how they're choosing which boats to strike that are leaving Venezuela. Right now, we really don't know anything. It could be as simple as the U.S. is targeting any vessel that's heading out into open international waters from Venezuela and assuming that it's a drug boat, and then they're saying, let's strike it. Right now, we don't know if that's the case. It could be that simple, the method of engagement. It could be that simple. Or it could be that maybe the intelligence agencies had some type of pre-warning or pre-knowledge that that vessel was leaving port with drugs, and they already had it in their sights, and once it entered international waters, then they strike it. But it seems a little bit concerning that there are allegations being lobbed around that the U.S. does not have positive identifications on the individuals in the boat before they actually strike it. Because let's say for hypothetically, let's say this. Let's say a Venezuelan fisherman, which, I'll get into some details about that in a second, but let's say a Venezuelan fisherman's heading out into international waters and the U.S. mistakes them for a cartel member and then accidentally strikes them with no due process. That would be obviously not good whatsoever. But to the U.S.'s credit, though, I will say this. Most of the boats that have been struck, they obviously have large outboard motors, multiple large outboard motors, which is not normal for a fishing vessel. Also, they do appear to be carrying some sort of brick-like style payload, like kilos, I guess you could say. So that's also a giveaway that they could be hauling some illicit substances. So it's a little bit tricky, I will admit. It's not as straightforward as I think some are making it out to be, and I do see the concern from several.
I would have to say, though, that at the same time, if there's any reasonable suspicion that some vessel is involved in terrorist operations like the transportation of drugs, we don't have to verify the individuals on board that vessel. Every single Somali pirate boat may have not had every single person on board that vessel as a pirate involved in piracy. Someone might have just been along for the ride. That still didn't stop them from getting obliterated by any navy that was patrolling the area during the anti-piracy patrols that we had in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. If reasonable suspicion is involved that the boat is involved in some sort of terroristic or illegal contraband activities, generally the deference is given that they are most likely all on board, assumed to be a part of terroristic operations or piracy, and they're given generally no quarter.
Yeah, but the problem with that is they're taking the lives of the people on the boat. So I would say having a suspicion is not enough, in my personal opinion. That's just simply not enough. Obviously, Venezuela has people that are within their country, within their borders, conducting narco-terrorism. But at the same time, we can't say that every single boat leaving Venezuela is a narco-terror boat. That's a little bit too far, in my opinion. So typically, the U.S. has had very, very strong rules of engagement. But right now, we're not getting any publicly stated knowledge right now from the U.S. officials about what the current engagement rules even are. It seems like it's either they're keeping it secret or they want to keep it away from the public's eye, one or the other. So the U.S. would probably be wise to at least explain how they're targeting these people, because, I mean, the argument's being made by a lot of people that they're not doing enough due diligence before they're taking these lives out on these boats. And the public deserves an answer to that, since the U.S. military and tax dollars are funding potentially the execution of people on these boats leaving Venezuela. So I can see the argument personally.
I can see the argument, but also just really quickly, folks, to present a counter and be a bit of a devil's advocate to this. If they go through the efforts to prove to the public that everyone on that vessel or the vessel itself and its crew were involved in some sort of operations as a part of the cartel, which are designated terrorists and therefore are provided no protections under international law, or at least according to the United States, if they were to do that, they would have to show exactly where that boat was loaded with drugs, so they would have to compromise how they got that information in some way, shape, or form, and also show exactly where that is, which could lead to that entire operation within that specific building or that specific part of a port being upended and sent elsewhere, meaning that the U.S. would have to then try and find out where they are again, making interdiction a lot more difficult. They would also have to start saying the exact names and people who were involved, which, if there is an informant on the ground which is involved in gathering that information, that might start to single down who an informant may be, as obviously they will have survived the strike and they wouldn't have been on board the boat. Another thing that we would have to also add is the path that the boat took, which also might be a heavily trafficked cartel boat path, which then would start to make the cartel change their courses, and then the United States would have to conduct significant intelligence gathering to figure out where the courses have been changed and where their new shipping routes have been spotted or have started to form. And all of those sorts of things could start to cause heavier issues with interdiction of the cartels if we were to assume that all of these vessels that have been hit so far are a part of the cartel, and could also start to compromise the safety and health of the informants and operatives on the ground that might be providing us with this information that is helping us to be able to confirm that these strikes are 100% verified and can be conducted.
I would say personally, like I see where you're coming from, but all I'm asking the U.S. to simply do on this is to basically to satisfy the critics of this whole operation is to simply release a simple statement about how the engagement is currently taking place. Simply tell the people the way they're targeting. They don't have to go into names. They don't have to go into details. All they can simply say is they had information about who was on the boat before they even got on the boat. They knew they were heading out to the open waters, and they had planned the strike properly. And simply reassure people that they're not wildly firing at any boat that's leaving Venezuela, because right now they've not really made that clarification. They've not even bothered to even try to clarify the situation, and I think that's leading to a lot of people to assume or speculate that the U.S. is being careless here when we really don't even know the answer.
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely the case. Still, folks, I'm just trying to make sure, folks, to give a counter to this. I see some people going off in the chat. I'm just trying to give a counter so that way we have two sides to this thing and we consider all options. But I generally would say that it's fairly questionable to be conducting strikes and give the public practically no information on why these strikes are being conducted to any degree rather than their cartel boats and just take that at face value. That is a little bit odd. You would think that they would at least go through the effort, like, say, the Ukrainians do, to confirm with some sort of video evidence by a drone that there are contraband on board and to show that at least some of the operators are involved with the cartels to some extent or some degree, so that way there is some sort of probable cause to conduct the strikes. But still, it is a little bit interesting, and also with the rumor floating around that one of these boats may have not even been Venezuelan, it may have been Colombian. That is also a fairly interesting sort of a development in its own degree. But moving on out of the Venezuelan situation and on into the rest of the news that we've been able to get for the night, we have also been able to confirm that the Russians have been in a bit of a pickle today in many ways than one. One, I want to bring y'all to this one. This story is actually a little bit crazy. The Novorossiysk, which was spotted several days ago on Sunday near to the area of Brittany in France, has actually ended up passing through the English Channel, the North Sea, and has finally made it into the Baltic. We were able to confirm that today, as this picture did show a Swedish Gripen off of the southern coast of Sweden, as well as a Swedish Styrso class MCM following along the Novorossiysk, as it's been surfaced apparently the entire time through the transit, and has now made its way finally into the Baltic. We also got additional pictures of this as well, including this one right here, which is a closer up picture of that Kilo class submarine. And it does appear that the Novorossiysk has actually started to pick up speed, and now it looks like we're getting a better timetable of what has been going on with the Novorossiysk. So let me give you all a quick breakdown of what we know so far. First off, the Novorossiysk was spotted servicing several miles off of the Strait of Gibraltar, apparently with a significant diesel leak on board, and called for the tugboat to be able to come to its rescue. The tugboat then attached to the submarine, pulled it through the Strait of Gibraltar, and apparently out into the coastlines on the eastern Atlantic. Here, the submarine sat for apparently around a week or so. It doesn't appear that its propulsion or speed has greatly been affected at this point, and it affected repairs as best as they could. Finally, the submarine went underway about a week or a week and a half after the original report, and that was when it was first spotted by the French Navy near to the area of Brittany, this peninsula here on the west coast of France. Since then, several days later, from Sunday to today, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a Wednesday, if if I'm not wrong with that. I think it is a Wednesday, Matthew. If I'm
Yes.
okay, so
Yes,
it is.
it's Wednesday.
So from Sunday to Wednesday, it has now made it all the way around the English Channel, the North Sea, and around Denmark, and has now made it into the very entrance of the Baltic Sea, which is where we are seeing it right now. So at the moment, it appears that the submarine has finally been able to pick up some speed and is making its way back to Kronstadt, where it'll most likely get repairs near St. Petersburg. This has probably been one of the most interesting stories of a submarine that we've seen so far, because we have never heard of a submarine, at least recently, having to surface because of a leak of fuel, diesel fuel, directly within the hull of the submarine. So we'll have to see if it makes it back to port. It looks like there's a high chance it may now, but another Russian submarine was also spotted near to Sweden today, and was also being observed by some sort of a Swedish Coast Guard vessel, and this was a picture of the Russian submarine that was taken.
Honestly, man, it's wild to see this Kilo class right here. This pride of the Russian fleet just sort of like limping its way back to port. Honestly, it's a joke, really. This thing keeps popping up, randomly surfacing every once in a while, and just scaring the hell out of like random countries all over the place. And the thing's not even a threat anymore. Like, this thing is barely surviving at this point, and the interior of the submarine itself has diesel leaks in it, and also probably has diesel fumes in the interior of the sub itself. So it's really crazy. Also, look at this. I mean, it's being tailed by a bunch of stuff. This is an embarrassment. Like, this is a huge embarrassment for Russia at this point. And I'd be very curious to know what the crew is doing. Like, is the full crew still on board this thing? And how are they even functioning with the diesel fumes inside of it? That's a huge question for me.
Yeah, it is a fairly interesting sort of a deal. Also, by the way, this is a totally different Kilo class submarine that was spotted today, rather than the Novorossiysk. This one was actually spotted far north in the Baltic by the Swedish Coast Guard. This one is the Novorossiysk that just entered the Baltic today. So 2 Kilo class submarines have been spotted in the Baltic over the day.
Interesting. I thought it was just one the whole time. I thought it was just one.
I would actually no, it's 2, because you can see here that this Kilo class submarine has some sort of barnacles growing near to the sonar dome at the front of the sub. You can see that here. On this one, whenever we look up close, at least the closest we can get, it appears to be a little bit cleaner, although it's a fairly far away picture. But from what we can tell, it looks to be a little bit cleaner towards the bow, and also on top of that, the weather states are completely different in this picture and this one. So this was a different submarine that was actually spotted today, further on up in the Baltic, from what I could find, because no one also mentioned that it was the Novorossiysk. Everyone just mentioned that it was some Kilo, while this one was clearly the Novorossiysk that had finally entered into the Baltic. So that's generally what we're knowing, at least for now, but it does appear, at the moment, that the Russian Navy is having a bit of an issue with the Kilo-class submarine, the Novorossiysk, and if I'm not mistaken, folks, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't the Novorossiysk the one that was blown up in that dry dock in Sevastopol that one time?
Wait, repeat the name again?
The Novorossiysk?
I don't recall. Like, to be honest with you, there's been so many incidents with their submarines, it's hard to keep them straight. And that was a long time ago.
Let me go pull up the Novorossiysk. Let's see here. Let's see. Interior relief. Let's see. Novorossiysk submarine returned to sail. So apparently it was not the one that was directly hit. But the story about the fuel leak is widely noted online. But unfortunately, folks, I cannot confirm if this was the submarine that was directly hit in the dry dock inside of Sevastopol. We'll have to try and do some more researching to figure out what exact Kilo-class submarine that was of the Black Sea Fleet that ended up getting obliterated by a couple of Ukrainian missiles that hit Sevastopol and that dry dock in particular. But still, it was the Rostov-on-Don. Yeah, it was the Rostov-on-Don that was hit in the dry dock. Yeah, big thanks to James Carter there.
Yeah, that was it. And also, by the way, I was reading real quick because I was curious. What are the effects of diesel fume exposure? Because I would assume that this Novorossiysk Russian Kilo-class sub probably keeps surfacing mainly to get fresh air for the crew, I would imagine. Because if there's diesel leaks inside the submarine, then naturally fumes are also being emitted as well inside the submarine's shell itself. So it looks like diesel fume exposure leads to short-term side effects like eye, nose, and throat irritation, headaches, and lightheadedness. Long-term exposure, which I think this crew right here might be able to qualify for that, depending on how long they're on board the sub. Long-term exposure is linked to lung cancer, respiratory diseases like asthma and heart disease, and also possibly even kidney damage as well, depending on the duration and the amount of the exposure. So quite serious, obviously, to be exposed to that long. And I would imagine they're probably surfacing and trying to open hatches or something, so that way they can get fresh air inside. So I don't know how they're doing it, to be honest with you. This is kind of like a feat of, I guess, human endurance, if this is true, because I don't see how they're enduring it.
The Russians, they're just built different, I guess. I really don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean, we can't rule it out. I mean, they are exposed to vodka at incredibly young ages. So maybe this is just like, I don't know, vodka fumes to them. Maybe it's something they're used to.
Maybe so, possibly, because I'm not sure if I'm not sure if we could endure that.
I don't think I can. I don't think I'm built differently like that, to be entirely honest. But we also do have other major news from around the rest of the world, and I actually got to move y'all into the Indian subcontinent as well as East Asia as a whole, as we have had some fairly interesting news coming out of these areas today before we circle back into the Middle East, into the United States, which is also a part of our East Asia news segment because of the trade war, and then back into Europe. But before we get to all of that, I do want to take a moment to say that we have had 63,000 people here at the start of the first hour of the show that have watched, and we also have 15.4 thousand people here with us right now. And I gotta say, a big thanks to all of y'all so much for watching so far. We still have a lot to go, but if you're new to the channel and you have been enjoying it, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to have y'all here, and we cover this news every single day at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 days a week, every day but Mondays. But in the meantime, folks, to give a big thanks to all of y'all for watching so far, we are going to make sure to get a couple of questions from the chat, and I've actually understood that we have quite a many of those already. The chat's been busy tonight. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our first super chat here goes to Brian McHenry, who puts in a massive $200 donation, a massive support, by the way, absolutely massive, and thank you very much, Brian, for that generous support right there. That's by far one of the largest ones we've had in a minute. And Brian said, keep up the good work, gentlemen, and it's good seeing the news that matters is getting out there, and God bless, and thanks for what you do.
And thank you massively for the support, Brian McHenry, and helping this channel to keep on running with that humongous support. I gotta say, it's an absolutely wonderful and incredible thing to know that folks like you enjoy the news that we put out there and love to hear us continuing to put the news that matters out there to the world at large, something that people don't hear on most other news networks, either on YouTube or on television. And I gotta thank you massively for that support, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to keep the lights on here behind the scenes. We wouldn't be able to keep the meek and feeble enforcers working hard every day to get this news out to each and every one of y'all. And to you, I have to thank you massively for the kind words and the support, because they're going to help us to keep doing what we've been doing for 1,330 days straight. So a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And also, I see some people in the chat continuing to talk about the Venezuela thing, and really quickly I got to say this, because a lot of people are saying things about this that lets me know that this is a very political sort of a topic to some, because here's what I'm seeing, folks. Either one, the strikes against Venezuela are entirely justified because the president is an infallible god among men, or it is the president is the demon of humanity, therefore anything he does is wrong, and therefore no strikes can ever be justified under any premise. I don't know if a lot of people know this that are saying this in the chat, but the channel is apolitical and is entirely based on the analysis side of things. We don't really care if people like the guy or not, we just care about the analysis of whether the action is legal or not, and generally that's what we're arguing here on the channel. I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate by saying these things could be justified. Not that I agree with that completely, but still putting out an opposing view, so that way we at least have a difference in thoughts and ideas here on the channel to make it a little bit more interesting. But I cannot make this clear enough for a lot of people. I'm not going to sit here and say that the entire situation with Venezuela is justified because the president is a lovely man, or the entire situation with Venezuela is unjustified because the president is a living demon on earth. We don't work that way on the channel, we never will, and I've just got to say this because the amount of chats that I'm seeing at this point that are telling us to say it one way or another just because of their political opinions on the president is a little bit tiring, considering that we just do analysis on the channel and we really don't care if people like him or not, because we don't even get into that here on the channel, and it doesn't really matter as far as foreign policy is concerned whether you like someone or not. So I hope that addresses that the best that I can, at least at this point, and puts that sort of stuff to rest, because I'll be honest, some people are getting a little bit too vehement on that, and we're probably going to have to start curbing that sort of a deal in the chat to some degree, because it's not even analysis based, it's opinion based in both directions. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here goes to none other than Ted Marshall, and Ted puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, Ted, for that generous support as well, and we do appreciate that. And Ted said, "Let's go." He said, "I'm finally on stream while it's live, and long live the LSA."
Hey, let's go, baby! And I gotta thank you massively, humongously for the support and helping this channel to keep it running. I gotta say, it's great to have you here, Ted Marshall, here on stream while it's live. A lot of people eventually make what we have always called the pilgrimage to be live on air. And I gotta say that I thank you incredibly for the support and helping this channel to be here and being live with us on air. A lot of people love to be here live on air when it's happening, and I love to know that folks are still making pilgrimages to make it to where they can be on air, live on air with us as we are covering the news. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the next one. But a humongous thanks to you once again, and I hope you've been having a good time here while we've been live.
All right, and indeed. And also, our last one here goes to Brian Maddox, and he put in a 50 as well. And a huge shout out to you, Brian, for throwing in that 50 as well, and also helping to keep the channel running. And he said, "What's the over-under on Ukraine kissing, wink, wink, nod, nod, the limping sub? Any way we can encourage this action? Love Ukraine, LSA, and thanks for the great channel, guys."
Hey, thank you for the huge support, Brian Maddox, and thank you for the great question and the kind words. Unfortunately, there really isn't a way for Ukraine to hit the sub, though. It would be great if they could. It's definitely limping and apparently sickly at this point, but sadly, there just really isn't a way for them to do it without violating NATO sovereignty in the process. For Ukraine to conduct a drone attack on that sub, they would have to fly a drone from Ukraine and into the Baltics. And no matter how they try and skin that cat, figure of speech, to get the drone into the Baltics, it will have to fly through NATO airspace someplace somewhere. So if they wanted to do that, they're going to have to get approval from NATO, and NATO is not going to give that approval because they're not going to want to look like they're directly involved in the sinking of a Russian sub. So then that means that Ukraine's drones are pretty much landlocked and really can't get to the sub most anyway. There is one way that they can get to it, though, and this is one that I usually do not bring up because it would be really hard to pull off. But if they launched a drone in the Chernihiv Oblast in the north of the country, they could get it into the area of the Gulf of Finland, right when the submarine's returning back to port at Kronstadt Island. If they pull that off successfully, they actually could hit the sub, considering that it's surfaced and it doesn't appear to have the ability to dive any longer, considering that it's probably trying to vent the diesel fume-filled air. So that is a possibility. Unfortunately, however, striking it where it is in the Baltics, he's out of Ukraine's abilities due to the fact that they would have to fly all the way around NATO airspace and then conduct the strike then and there. And also, folks, I see Gregory C say, this is actually a pretty good one. Gregory C said, better to ask for forgiveness. It's going to be really hard to ask for forgiveness if they do that, and then that starts to escalate a larger conflict between Russia and NATO on the spot. That could start to distance Europe from Ukraine, because now Ukraine is putting their interests at Europe's detriment. And that usually is where the sort of amicable relations we see right now would come to an end and cease. Case in point, the relationship between the United States and Israel has been strained recently because the Israelis conducted an attack on Qatar without our approval in a way to try and ensure that we had no way to see the attack was even happening until they had already hit their targets inside of Qatar. And that generally started to strain our relationship because they were about to screw over our U.S. forces that are based inside of the Middle East, a lot of them in Qatar, that might have been kicked out if the Qataris got angry enough about that incident. And also the fact that the U.S. wouldn't even deal with the incident or admonish the Israelis for that matter. So generally, it's something that's doable. Like, that's actually an interesting idea. It's something that's doable, but that also has to be measured out. And I think the NATO nations would be probably absolutely pissed, royally pissed, honestly, if the Ukrainians did something like that and flew a drone through their territory to conduct an armed attack without their approval at all, and then just ask for forgiveness later, because the tensions are incredibly high right now. A match could set the whole thing off, and the Ukrainians doing that could be the very match that could set this whole thing off before Europe is ready or before they're mentally prepared to deal with what lies ahead. But I hope that does address it the best I can. Very great question, by the way, Brian Maddox and everyone else tonight. And I got to thank all three of y'all for the massive support once again. And we will be getting to all of the other questions, super chats, and live chats that we have throughout the rest of the night after we round out the rest of our news. In case you're new to the channel.
Also, real quick, Enforcer, before we move on, I ran one last poll. I wasn't going to do this, but due to all the controversy in the chat and how wild this has gotten so far in the chat, I wanted to run one last poll on the Venezuela situation to see exactly what the majority of people thought about this question. Real quick, let me go over it and then jump to the rest of the news here. The question on the poll says, should the U.S. government provide an explanation of the rules of engagement on Venezuelan targets? 52% said yes, it's needed for clarity, while 32% said no, it might violate OPSEC, and 12% said citizens don't need to know in the first place. So on this one, this is my personal opinion. Once again, you're free to have your own. This is totally subjective right now. It's totally up to your opinion. So I would say I'm with the 52%. I believe the government should err on the side of caution and be more transparent than untransparent with the American people. Because right now, and once again, when we always launch these large military actions overseas, it's U.S. tax dollars that fund those operations. So under that premise, I believe that citizens always have a right to know within reason. Now, there's some things that we can't tell the American people. I know that myself. There's some things for OPSEC reasons that cannot be disclosed. Everything can't be wide open, but at the same time, though, we can get a basic explanation for what the government's doing with certain actions, for example, striking boats in international waters. Because right now, there's a lot of critics saying that they're not properly doing identification, and that would ease those fears of the American people that are funding this operation. So I would say I'm with the 50%. I feel pretty strongly about that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I actually would be with the 50% as well. And while I have played devil's advocate throughout the night, I do have to say that I do not like the position that the United States government is currently taking with the public about informing them on the situation. It is incredibly important for the nation, whether people like to think about this way or not, that the public is informed about what the government is doing as much as they possibly can inform the public to that greatest extent and end. It is through the concept of the government being elected by the citizenry of this nation that the government owes to the citizenry a large amount of explanations, receipts, and transparency about what exactly we were doing across the world. And while I would have to say I completely understand why they are taking the cartel approach to the Venezuelan situation rather than openly stating they're curbing Chinese influence, that sort of a difference in statements can be understood. Not giving statements, however, about the rules of engagement and other factors involved in U.S. military action against Venezuela is something that I not only find condescending to the public, but I also find it incredibly non-transparent to the public that elected the current administration that's deciding to take these actions, and these actions should always be within the purview of the public to make their own judgment on whether or not those actions are acceptable or not. If I was the President of the United States, I would try and provide as much information as possible to the U.S. public about the strikes that the United States is conducting, as long as it did not violate any sort of operational security or the safety or lives, or lives for that matter, of the informants and operatives that are on the ground helping to provide the information that is leading us to be able to conduct these sorts of strikes, if that's even involved on the ground. It's always important to remember, folks, that while operational security is a paramount importance for the military, at the same time, we have to balance that operational security with the duty and obligation that the civilian administration, which operates the military, has to the public, which has elected the civilian administration, which operates the military, to tell them exactly what we are doing, why we are doing it, and to let those public citizens have an opinion on whether or not they agree with those actions, whether or not the information is good or not. Transparency is generally a key fortitude and fortress of democratic opinions, and also, for that matter, knowledge, which allows people to make their own decisions on whether or not they agree with what the United States government is doing or not on a domestic level. But still, I hope that does address that the best I can. At
I,
least.
I do think though they should at least be baseline transparent, because even in the past, like when we've gone to war in the Middle East, yes, the government did technically lie, and it's not technically, they did lie about the weapons of mass destruction. So that was one thing that wasn't good, but at least they gave an explanation for why we were going to war. Even if it was a lie, they at least tried to explain it because they understood that the public needs some answer for why we're going to do that, and they gave one. Now, obviously, it was not the truth, so that wasn't much help, but at least they made an attempt at it, I guess you could say. But right now, we're really not getting much of an explanation whatsoever, except for narco terrorism. That word keeps being thrown around a hell of a lot, and we're really not getting any specifics about anything. I'm not saying to go and expose the names of CIA operatives. I am definitely not saying that. I'm also not saying to start exposing where our ships are located, the exact locations of our Air Force, nothing like that. Not saying that whatsoever. The public cannot know things like that, and they don't have a need to know things like that. But what we do have a need to know is what the U.S. military is planning to do objectively on a large-scale picture, because we have a right to know as citizens that our military and our tax dollars are being spent on something that's in American interest, and the government doesn't have a right to do things without even informing the public while they're using our tax dollars to do it. So that's my opinion on it. Transparency is important. Some people have gotten way too complacent on that, and they just think, oh, the government's got it. They've got our best interests at heart, and they might, but it doesn't hurt to get that transparency to ensure that they're taking the action that's in our best interest, in my personal opinion.
I would also have to add, adding on to that a little bit, that telling the public we were able to verify that all of the members on the board of the boat were involved in cartel operations, the vessel was carrying contraband, and for that reason we took the action to destroy the vessel in international waters, or even in Venezuelan territorial waters. That is a far greater depth of transparency that's being given right now. Because all we hear right now is they are narco terrorists and we blew them up. And that's it. That's all we hear, and every single time we get the information about another boat being hit. And that is quite a small amount of information. And while some people will take that at face value, which is entirely reasonable, there is a good bit of scrutiny that should be given to whether or not that's actually being done with the best interest in mind of following the proper rules of engagement, or at least giving some sort of due diligence to ensuring that whatever we're hitting is the actual target that's supposed to be hit. That's generally what I would say would be the best approach to make, because at least then we're not violating any operational security, but we are going through the efforts to say our intelligence has provided that, and for that reason, this is why we conducted the strikes. So that's what I would generally say, at least at the base premise of it. Of course, though, I also have to say that another thing that's important to remember is that too much transparency, especially in military operations, can also be deadly and dangerous. We could get informants killed, we could get operatives killed. A lot of people would have their lives on the line if you started to share too much information, and so then we also had to protect those people's lives and their health as well by not divulging too much information to the public simultaneously. But still, I hope that does address that the best that we can, at least from what we have at the moment. But it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have for the night, and we are going to be making sure to get into that as deep as we possibly can. Moving on into the regions of North Korea, we have been able to hear that according to some information provided by South Korea, Russia is helping North Korea to build submarines armed with ballistic missiles that can strike the United States. They actually already have one of these, but it appears that Russia is now helping to build more of these submarines. We're not expecting them to be extremely capable. The one they currently have is certainly not capable, and it's a little bit interesting, to say the least. Meanwhile, South Korea has also stated that the North Koreans are now setting up anti-tank barriers and ditches along the border with South Korea at key border checkpoints. The Republic of Korea's Joint Chief of Staff confirmed satellite imagery showing that Pyongyang's military is conducting fortification work along the MDL, or the demilitarized zone. On 4 sections, concrete anti-tank obstacles are being erected, stretching about 10 kilometers in total, with a height of 4 to 5 meters and a thickness of around 2 meters. So it does appear that the North Koreans are once again conducting more border defensive actions, which is incredibly interesting. It might just be some sort of a diplomatic posturing, or it may actually be something further than that. We're unclear what it is at the moment, but we are going to be keeping an eye on the Korean situation and see what's going on continued as a result of that. In the meantime, the People's Republic of China has also violated Filipino waters again. as we have seen that the Filipino Coast Guard today has discovered a second yellow floating buoy installed at the northern tips of the area of the Scarborough Shoal during a maritime domain awareness flight conducted this morning. This follows another buoy that was placed at the center of the shoal yesterday, highlighting ongoing activities in the area. From what we understand, these buoys have been placed by the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Coast Guard. That was so loud that gave me a heart attack.
Oh man, that had me stroking out over here, I tell you.
I'm not gonna lie, I actually just had a heart attack right there. Hang on a moment, folks. I gotta get my blood pressure down a little bit from that one. That was actually quite scary. But there was a Chinese J-16 that was also following along this Filipino helicopter that was flying over the area of the Scarborough Shoal, once again showing that the People's Republic of China is attempting to exert direct control over the shoal, which is right off of the Philippines. If y'all have not seen the Scarborough Shoal, it's nothing that impressive, but it is a Filipino territorial holding. The Scarborough Shoal is kind of like a reef is the best way to explain it, off the coast of the Philippines. It generally is considered to be an island, and for that reason, it extends the Philippines' territorial and exclusive economic zone waters a good bit farther out into the South China Sea. The Chinese are attempting to try and take direct control of this thing and claim that it's theirs, and all of these actions appear to be a part of that continued effort as of today. Now, it's time for us to start moving on towards Afghanistan and Pakistan. What we've all been waiting for tonight, the real shebang, in a literal sense. But, you know something, folks? We got to get y'all to one more thing. Modi has promised, he's given an assurance to the president, that India will not be buying oil from Russia. I have a feeling that might not be true, because they kind of seem to have been unfazed in buying oil from the Russians for a good minute. So, I don't know if that's true. But, you know, I have a feeling that that's going to be an interesting move from the U.S. And that also shows that we apparently have to be completely benevolent. If we were involved with the Pakistanis in their actions in Afghanistan right now, Modi most likely wouldn't do anything that would benefit the United States, like stopping the purchases of Russian oil. So I would have to say, as far as the Pakistan-Afghan war, I think this is a further proof that the U.S. isn't involved in between the Pakistanis or the Afghanis in any sort of a preferential way to support whatever's going on. I think we're completely removed from the Afghan Taliban, the Pakistan Taliban situation that's happening right now in that area. Moving on from that, however, we have also seen as well, at least within Pakistan and Afghanistan, that a ceasefire has now been put in effect. A 48-hour ceasefire is now in place between the two sides. It appears that this didn't last too long from what I can tell, because I can't really tell you all if these strikes happened before or after, because it appears that the sequence of events is murky, as best as I could find.
It happened before. The ceasefire went into effect. So far, I've not seen any violation of the ceasefire. All those strikes that we saw on camera were before it went into effect.
Okay, good, because I was trying to find out that earlier today, and I saw multiple different moments that we retweeted that the ceasefire had gone into effect from 15 hours ago and so on, and then these strikes were happening 15 hours ago and so on as well, as far as our videos were being reposted. And I was like, did these happen before or after? According to Enforcer Matt, they all happened before, but we did see that Pakistan landed some pretty heavy blows once again on the Taliban before the ceasefire went into effect, including these fires, which were seen inside of Kabul at an oil storage facility. We also have another clip of that fire right here as well.
Oh my.
It's kind of cooking. We also saw another clip of airstrikes within an unidentified area of the country, with this showing multiple bombs that impacted a central area of a city.
That was Kandahar right there, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's Kandahar right there. Four bombs, Kandahar.
That's Kandahar. Let's move that right down there then. And we also get to see down near the area of Spin Buldak, which is right along the border, that it appears that some sort of a Pakistani shelling led to 12 civilian deaths and 100 injured because of the barrage that happened on this town today. Oh my god, it's a Taliban tank. Can you believe? Can you believe? It is a T-62, it seems. Oh my god.
That's more modern. That's more modern. They had the T-55s rolling through the street too. I don't know if you have that video or not, but they were whipping it through the street.
Oh no, I don't have that video, sadly. But now we can see them panning back towards the border area and then back towards the tank. I can't believe it, folks. Taliban armor. Wow. And it's kind of going slow. I think that thing's having like some transmission issue or something. But anyways, moving on from that, we do confirm that at least at this point, the ceasefire appears to largely be in effect. No TAMs have been issued for tomorrow. Right now, at least within that region, it is already tomorrow. And we are waiting to see what is going to be happening as a result after this 48-hour ceasefire has gone into effect. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So if y'all saw the short video earlier today, I covered this in detail. But before these strikes were carried out, we saw the Pakistanis and the Afghan military, the Taliban, sending tons of equipment to the border. I mean a lot of it. And granted, most of the equipment that the Afghanis were sending to the border were like museum pieces. It was T-55 tanks, old artillery, very old stuff. So not very good for the Taliban. And the Pakistanis were sending their own tanks and other equipment to the border. So the ceasefire went into effect literally as both sides were armed to the teeth and literally sitting there waiting to fire at each other. So very precarious right now. So how long do you think the ceasefire is going to hold up? 58% said the ceasefire will fail soon, while 13% said the ceasefire will hold, and 25% said it's a 50-50 chance of either. So me personally, this one's hard to tell. I said that in the short video earlier today as well. It's hard to tell what this one's going to do because I was not predicting the Taliban to start fighting the Pakistanis, and this is totally unexpected. So where this one leads is a little bit of a toss-up. I'm actually with a 25%. It could be a 50-50 chance of either because I really don't know what the Taliban mindset is toward this war at this point. I'm not sure if they really have the will to fight it. They might be willing to sort of just smooth this thing over. It's hard to tell. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say I have a feeling the ceasefire might fail, considering how considering how decentralized the Taliban is, and also usually how aggressive these different factions of the Taliban are. It's highly likely that this ceasefire could break just because of the Taliban. I would assume that that might be the case. We'll have to wait and see. We could be surprised. The ceasefire could remain in effect for a while, but we don't really know. And honestly, this year has been just one of the most unpredictable. So it might hold or it might not. I don't want to sound like a politician here giving a non-answer, but I would have to be within the camp that I'm unsure, actually. I really don't know what's going to be the end result of the current 48-hour ceasefire and whether or not this whole war is going to restart again not that long afterwards. Also, really quickly, I got to return back to the Venezuela thing. Don't mean to beat a dead horse,
no.
but
Oh, no.
I got to return back to it because I've seen this comment made so many times in the chat. I'm like, I got to address it because I don't think some people are understanding this. Some people are saying that the U.S. government has declared a large part of the American population terrorists as well, and I know that that's kind of a little bit of a domestic political thing, but I got to explain this because it is a difference that a lot of people are not getting. Okay, one. Domestic terrorists are totally different than foreign terrorists in how they are treated. If you do not know, many groups inside the United States have been labeled as domestic terrorists. Probably one of the most famous ones that come out of the South is the Ku Klux Klan, which has been a domestic terrorist group since the 1960s. That is something that's commonly known. There are a load of domestic terrorist groups inside the United States, but domestic terrorist groups are treated differently because domestic terrorist groups are usually made up of U.S. citizens. So they are, of course, subject to the protections and laws of the United States of America, and any actions conducted against them, it's usually conducted by the FBI, which is generally for internal affairs inside the United States of America and dealing with situations like that. On the other hand, you cannot expect the same sort of treatment being given to groups like, say, Antifa and the KKK and so on and so forth, and I think a couple of others that are out there, to be the same sort of treatment that the Houthis or Al-Qaeda or the cartels are going to get because they are foreign terrorist groups. And therefore, they're not provided any protections at all under international law or anything for that matter. Don't know if y'all saw this, but the United States has been conducting for about 20 years now this crazy thing called the War on Terror, where if we find out that anyone is involved with terrorist operations to any degree, and we have enough evidence to prove it, we'll just hit them with a hellfire from 30,000 feet up, 20 miles away, and we call it a day. We've been doing that for 24 years at this point, just about. That's how it works with foreign terrorist groups. Domestic terrorist groups are treated differently. And also, I find it a little, like, I gotta say, folks, I know that there's, like, this whole political thing going on these days about this, that, and another inside the United States, but designating groups inside the United States as terrorist organizations is literally nothing new. It has been going on for decades now. And so, trying to make that the equivalent of you're going to get airstriked by the U.S. government because because it's a domestic terrorist group, and trying to make some sort of a similarity between a domestic terrorist group and a foreign terrorist group doesn't work, because there's never been any historical similarities in how the U.S. government treats the two different groups. So with that, I hope that addresses that the best I can, because that's just a false equivalency that doesn't exist in real life. But anyways, moving on from that and on into the rest of the news that we have also been able to get some reports from Israel, as we have heard that apparently the Israelis are already carving up a brand new war plan in the IDF to prepare for a plan to defeat Hamas in Gaza if fighting resumes. We have also heard that Netanyahu has stated today that Israel has given the U.S. new intelligence that shows Hamas has access to more of the bodies than it's claimed to have access to. So I do not know what that statement's supposed to mean, or what that is going to largely entail, but it kind of sounds like the Israelis are already setting themselves up to start another conflict with Hamas here soon by saying that the Hamas forces have violated some sort of an act of goodwill in the ceasefire by not disclosing a number of remains that they did not declare to the Israeli government, and for that reason they're going to start this all over again. Maybe, I don't know, but the
Is a ceasefire regulated? Is it regulated?
Why are you regulated?
Why are you regulated? Is a ceasefire? Is it written down? Is it regulated?
Have you ever heard of Burger King? I can tell you something. I make great hamburger meat. Like it's not made out of cattle though. But beyond that, I would have to say a little bit of a interesting development coming out of Israel. That's all we have out of the region today, but still an interesting update. Moving on out of that, however, it is time for us to get on back into the whole of Europe and to cover all of the developments that have been coming out of this area as of today. First off, it appears that the Secretary of Defense was inside of Brussels today and did state the following. If this war does not end, if there's no path to peace in the short term, then the United States, along with our allies, will take the steps necessary to impose costs on Russia for its continued aggression. If we must take this step, the U.S. War Department stands ready to do our part in ways that only the United States can do. So we are now back to square one as we were in the earlier part of 2022 when the war started that many years ago, to where we're saying that if the Russians continue the war, we're going to start imposing further punishments on them. So better late than never that sort of a change happened, but, that's what we now has an update and an official stance from the United States Department of Defense on foreign policy as of today. In the meantime, we also were able to hear that the Secretary of Defense's aircraft had to take an emergency detour after apparently one of the aircraft's windows either broke or caved in and led to a depressurization of the cabin, which forced the aircraft to circle back and return to the United Kingdom to either wait for a replacement aircraft or to effect repairs on the 757 to allow for it to make its adventure back to the United States. So a fairly interesting sort of an occurrence right after the meeting that was had with NATO today. But moving us on into Belarus and the Ukraine war itself, because we also have a huge amount of news out of there. We have also been able to hear in Belarus today that there is a further unification effort that's now being done between the two. I also have to say that this picture of Putin and Lukashenko looks pretty odd. Very
It's very progressive.
It is quite progressive. Man, I'm not gonna lie. What's he reaching for, by the way?
Huh.
A little sus, I'm not gonna lie.
Remember that Lukashenko is a man of a very large proportion. You have to remember that. Remember.
Man, Lukashenko said, have you ever seen a Russian sausage? Like, bro, it's like, get your hands back. Man, honestly, bro, questionable as hell. I'm not gonna lie, man. This picture, it exudes an energy that is not good. But beyond that, the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko has approved a protocol allowing Russian citizens permanently residing in Belarus to vote and run in local elections. From now on, Russians will be able to vote and run for seats in Belarus's local self-government bodies. So the unification of Belarus and Russia continues. It practically is a satellite of Russia at this point, to the degree that there's really no autonomy in Belarus anymore. The military is entirely subordinate to the Russian military. The population is now being supplanted by the Russians themselves in Belarus, so it's pretty much a Russian colony at this point, actually.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Honestly, like I'm just trying to understand this whole vibe of this picture right here at this point. Because Lukashenko's got the top of his shirt unbuttoned, and it looks like I can't tell if he's wearing is that a gold chain under the shirt, or is that just a collar? a silver chain under under the shirt, and obviously a very portly fellow, a very large fellow. And then you have Putin over here with the rolled up sleeves on a dress shirt, looking disheveled. This is just a very odd photo. Like, I'm not trying to say anything about it or anything, but it's just a very odd photo. Like, something about it is really off. And also, what are they doing? Sitting in like the orange grove or something?
I really don't know. Also, by the way, has anyone checked to see if Lukashenko's neck is turning green from that chain?
Man, I tell you what,
You got to remember, it's only the finest chains. A golden chain.
It's made of that glass silver. It's made, it turns your neck freaking green. I gotta say, this whole picture is just the oddest thing. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it gives off the worst energy possible. It's like that picture of Putin riding that horse shirtless. You know, it's like the same sort of energy that comes off.
yeah, I think so. Honestly, this one might top the horseless, or the not the horseless, but the shirtless horse photo. It might top it actually.
Man,
Where's Lavrov? Lavrov wants in on this.
Bruh, Lukashenko out here going, in Belarus, healthcare is free, unlike in the wicked capitalist West. Putin, let me give you a testicular cancer check right now. And then he's like doing it right now. It's like, bruh, I do not know what the hell that picture is, but it's odd. Anyways, moving on out of Belarus and that weirdness that happens in that damn country every day. I gotta be honest with y'all, Belarus is just the weirdest place. It's about as weird off as Turkmenistan, and that's a whole rabbit hole for a whole other time. If you just asked yourself when I said that, what the hell goes on in Turkmenistan? You don't even want to know. It's weirder than North Korea. It's actually more authoritarian than North Korea, crazily enough. But we won't talk about that right now. We'll leave that for a whole other time and a whole other topic, but that one's a crazy rabbit hole. Anyways, moving on down into Ufa. We did get to hear inside of Ufa that the oil refinery has been hit again. Oh no! Another oil refinery has been hit in Lego City. Hey! You can build the firefighting team and bring them to save the day. That's not happening. This is Russia, so there is no fire brigade. Was that guy wearing an what the? Bro, I swore that was an ATF coat for a second.
Oh no! Oh no!
It's the Department of Killjoy like here, and we're here to make sure you're not having fun. We can see the Liudi flying in.
Flying right into Ufa. He calls it a big oof.
The Ukrainians are attacking the oil refinery. Hey, you can build the
Беспилотник
Pechnik.
видел, нет? Похуй, летит.
I thought that was you for a second right there.
You thought it was you?
I thought that was you, like the guy talking in that video. I thought that was you.
Oh no, that wasn't me.
It kind of sounded like you a little bit. But
Well, what are these guys doing shaking hands in the parking lot? They were they were just like casually doing a little understanding handshake there while the drone's getting hit. They're like, "Good job, comrade. Yes, good job to you too."
Let's see here. Let's watch that. Oh, now the video wants to buffer. Okay, so we'll just move on from that one. They didn't want us to see that. That's the
Damn.
video that the government doesn't want you to see. But moving on from that, this is pretty much a duplicate of all the same clips, just in a different format, just in case the other one didn't load. We put that there just for redundancy purposes. Moving on out of Ufa, however, and down towards Saratov. Oh, buddy, folks. You better be lucky you do not live in Russia, because their safety standards are non-existent. A Russian bomber accidentally dropped a 1,000-pound high-explosive bomb on a Russian city. On the 12th of October... Whoopsie daisy! On October 12th, a bomber took off from Ingles Air Base for a strike on Ukrainian cities, but soon after takeoff, it dropped one of the Fab 500s. It failed to detonate, and no casualties were reported, according to Russia's emergency ministry. Local authorities reportedly tried to cover up the incident. I gotta be honest with y'all, folks. If you ever thought that America was bad off, at least you don't have bombs falling on your head from the aircraft that are taking off from the nearby air bases. That generally doesn't happen here in America, but it does happen in Russia. So, you know, count your blessings, folks. At least America isn't that bad off that a bomb's dropping on your head. You know, Matthew, honestly, that statement from the president a long time ago when someone was like, what if the ceasefire holds? And the president was like, I don't know. What if a bomb dropped on your head? That's kind of true if you're in Russia. Like, it could just happen. A bomb could just drop on your head. Any minute of the day, it could actually happen.
It would suck to live in Russia, honestly. I don't like that. It doesn't feel like you have like basic safety in Russia or anything like that. Regardless of what propagandists go through, like the one street in Moscow that looks nice. I mean, I just wouldn't want to live in Russia. It just seems like it sucks. You know, you got to drive a Lada, you got to struggle to get gas, you got to pay exorbitant prices in relation to your income to buy groceries and stuff. Like, it just seems like it kind of sucks. You know what I mean?
I don't know. What if a bomb dropped on your head? And that's honestly what can happen inside of Russia. Russia's a really bad place. Looks like an absolute shithole. I drove down the streets, and when I pulled over my car, I went out to go into the restroom at the gas station. I came out, and my car was on cinder blocks. The gas tank had been siphoned. These people are in bad shape, everyone. Real bad shape. I went into Saratov the other day, and a bomb really did drop on someone's head. I said there was like a figurative statement in the Oval Office, and turns out that actually happens in Russia near to the air bases. Many such cases. Whenever they send out their aircraft, they're not sending their best. They're sending their worst. They're sending the ones with defective bomb payloads, defective bombs. They're sending out shitty pilots, pilots with mental issues. They try and eat themselves while they're flying the plane. Really weird. I called up Putin and I said, Sir, what the hell is going on with this? And he said, I don't know, but I'm going to keep the war going. And I said, well, that's kind of shitty because I kind of need you to stop that. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have from inside of Ukraine directly. And we do have a decent amount. Moving us on into Ukraine and into the Kursk Oblast, we did get to see that the Russians were getting hit by the Ukrainian border guards inside the Kursk Oblast. Oh, is that a Russian in the trees? Oh, it is. Oh, he's making a run for it. That's smart, but sadly not smart enough.
He's doing like those people doing those horror movies. He tripped and fell.
Oh, God, no! And sadly, it appears that he ended up in the horror movie. He was the first one to die. We can now see the Astron coming in, giving a little lesson. Oh! And we see them continuing to hit multiple Russian forces. Just endlessly, folks. It's without end. It's without ceasing.
Looks like a big hit right there. Looks like they really did a number on that one.
Oh, yeah, they really did a number. Oh, dang, dude, that thing whipped around quick.
That guy wasn't expecting that either. It sort of whipped around a little too fast for your reaction, you know?
Honestly, it kind of did. We also got to see them slamming Russian forces as well within the Sumy Oblast here. You know, doing their usual tricks, flying them into the buildings, into the houses, into the streets. You see a couple of Russians down there in that ditch.
You know, honestly, when you said it was in the Sumy Oblast and you said that they were trying to watch out, it reminded me of the old Japanese phrase sumimasen, which means excuse me or I'm sorry. So I guess you could say the drone said that, sumimasen.
That's deep. Are you still
That is-
wearing that prefecture shirt?
No, I'm not wearing my F1 shirt today.
Oh, I was wondering. I was like, man, you must be wearing your shirt. I was like, because you're thinking of the Japanese. By the way, folks, Matthew actually has a Japanese F1 shirt. It's actually pretty cool looking. And I was thinking that he was wearing it today, but apparently not.
It's Suzuka, you know, Suzuka Circuit.
Oh, the Suzuka Circuit? I've never heard of that one. Is that like an electrical connection?
Yeah. It's really good. It's in Suzuka, Japan.
Oh, well, maybe we'll take a look at that here on the question segment. Maybe I don't know, but we can see them continuing to slam the Russian forces. And I mean, goodness gracious, folks, here it comes again, right into another house, and another one. Oh, right into the window. And another one, and this house is on fire. Someone call the fire department. Well, that's the end of that clip. And moving on down the way and into our location unknowns, we did get the Russian casualty report for the past 24 hours, which was quite impressive. And Miss Disick here with the record stated that 389 drones is the 12th highest daily loss. Troop losses now at 10 days over 1,000, and daily average for October to date exceeds both August and September and is close to the July average. And over the course of the past 24 hours, we have been able to see that 1,070 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed, along with 2 APCs, 141 supply trucks, 3 main battle tanks, 43 artillery pieces, and 389 drones, along with 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. A fairly good total overall. Moving us on into the area of Vovchansk, we also were able to see the Ukrainians hitting Russian forces here. They were hitting them here and everywhere. Oh, here they come. Here's a little Russian position with an AK and a backpack, and they blew that up. Oh my goodness! What in the hell was that? Hey, look, it's a drone, Blair.
Oh, wow.
It's a little drone war, everyone. It's like Star Wars. Oh, and they got it. Oh my god, that was actually crazy. And then they got a
That is
Bahaka.
wild. Oh, look, a dirt bike. They got a dirt bike sitting over in the corner. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at him. That is something.
We have a Rodniks section.
Oh, what the hell?
And then we got the Zero with a little funny hat on.
That was very clean on the inside of that Ural. That's shocking, actually. It was like kept up very nice. It was kept up cleaner than the outside of the vehicle.
Man, the Russians and cleanliness? Crazy. Oh, and another one. Oh, and another. Oh my goodness. They go for the cab every time. It's crazy like that. And right into the front of this Ural. And right into the front of this Ural. As well as this one.
Oh, look, a Bing Shaling Jeep thing. What the hell was that? That looked like one of those old style, like, car pickup truck hybrid things that were hideous that they used to make back in the day.
Yeah, honestly, it kind of did. Yeah. Oh, dirt bike. Oh, they got it. Oh, another one. And they got that.
Oh.
Oh, look. Oh.
Moto Central.
Oh, my God. They're destroying them all. Oh, and they're getting some SPGs. Look at this. This is a Mr. S.
You need a Mr. S for your Mr. B.
Blink. Right in the driver's hatch. Nuke Duke said, modern war is brutal. To be fair, every war is brutal. Honestly, I would have to say that old wars that happened before the year 1900 are probably the most brutal because you had a really high chance of dying before you even saw combat from disease and other sorts of afflictions. Even just exposure, just dying of overexhaustion from the heat or the cold. Like, honestly, that's really brutal when you think about it, because honestly, your chances of even surviving the war at all were quite low because you could just die getting to the war itself. The high chance of likelihood of that. But anyways, moving on from that and down into the area of the regions of Solidar, we also got to see them slamming Russian forces in the 30th Brigade within this direction.
I think they missed with that one.
I think they might have. But the Buhanka was abandoned, and so I guess you could say it was kind of collateral. Oh, and the Smoky. Man.
You know, I just wondered, like, when a Russian gets off like the battlefield and they go back to their normal life, you know, that's very rare, by the way, for the average Russian soldier. Usually they don't quite make it, unfortunately. Obviously, from the humanitarian perspective, that's a bad thing. But when they come back and they get a mortgage at the bank and they say, "What do you want to put up as collateral?" and the Russian says, "I am collateral."
Get it? Because they are. Like, man.
Come on, I'm bombing out here. I mean, help me. I get no respect around here. I get no respect.
Man, what do you call it when you mix a Russian with an alcoholic?
A soldier?
A Russian! But anyways, moving on from that. That joke made no sense, by the way, folks, because I used the Russian as a build-up to say if you mix a Russian and alcohol, you get a Russian. Like, it might be funny a little bit, but not really. But anyways, moving on from that, we also get to see that the Russians are getting pushed back by the 93rd Brigade near Kholodny Yar, which is north of Pokrovsk. And this was an area that we were able to confirm the Ukrainians took several hundred meters in today, which is quite significant. And it appears that a large amount of the Russian forces within this area were also destroyed as well. Well, that's the end of that clip. Very nice to see. Good to know. The Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back little by little. And further on down the front, we also got to see them hitting Russian forces down here in the 68th Jaegers.
You'd almost think they're German with the way they say Jaeger. But oh man.
Yeah, boy.
Man, they oh man, did a ditty on him.
No diddy.
Man, he was you know, in that truck and everything.
Ain't nothing like a ditty party. Ain't nothing like a ditty party. Like, I would think that there probably is something better to do. You know, folks, folks knew that they were screwed whenever they showed up at Diddy's place, because if there was ever baby oil covering all of the steps entering and exiting the building, you knew it was over for you once you stepped inside. It's like a mob hit, nearly.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. We always have to say allegedly. But we can see them hitting here another Russian relay system. And it does appear the 68th Jaegers has a brand new outro again. They are obsessed with outros, but honestly, they're getting better with each and every passing week. But moving on from that and out of the Pokrovsk area and further on down the front and towards Vasilivka, we did also get to see them hitting Russian forces down here. Take a look at this. And we see them bringing them on in. Look at them go. Slamming the Russians in this area. We also see another drone down there helping out. Look at that. How kind of them. You know, folks, if you ever sneeze in front of the President of the United States and you say, oh, excuse me, and he says, oh, of course you're pardoned, is that a presidential pardon?
I don't know.
You know, if you bump into the president and you say, "Oh, pardon me," and he says, "Oh, of course," is that a presidential pardon? What is a presidential pardon even? You know, like they always say that it's pretty much an absolvement of your crimes, and the president's pretty much giving you kind of like a free pass almost. But at the same time, though, folks, like there's so many different things that could be classified as a presidential pardon that have nothing to do with that. You know, like I wonder about that.
I don't know.
Like for example, if the president, who's the executive of the United States, tells one of the staff of the White House to go down to a bathroom and clean the toilet, is that an executive order?
I don't know.
There's so many questions that I have. Like there's many. And I don't get answers to them. We will have to go to the White House one day and ask the president these questions directly and get answers. I need to know. Is that a presidential pardon? And also, is that an executive order? I have no clue. Anyways, moving on from that and down into Kherson, I do have to move y'all into some news that is incredibly unfortunate today, as there does appear to be clear proof that the Russian Federation actually attacked a United Nations humanitarian convoy that was entering the city of Kherson today, directly with FPV drones. We do not know the exact amount of wounded and killed that were involved in this strike particularly, but it does appear to be another blatant attack by the Russian Federation and their armed forces on the humanitarian assistance of the United Nations within the area, which is heavily war afflicted and does have a large amount of wounded and killed civilians from inside the city of Kherson from prior strikes. So a very unfortunate thing to see. But with that, we are going to be moving on out of that area and on up into Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on this very day of the war. And that's if the presidential website loads. Hopefully it does. It was loading earlier when I got this thing, so we can only hope, everyone. We can only hope. And we will have to see,
You're waiting for a very long time to see if Zelensky comes through. Look, he's taking a sick selfie. He said, look at the patches on my wall. Nobody can compete with the patches on my wall. It's a fantastic thing, better thing. It's some say the best thing.
We are adding thumbnails to the videos to try and make them appeal to a larger audience. And I have to say that it is kind of working a little bit. But nevertheless, here is the speech. Speech!
Шановні українці, українки, провів ставку. Кілька тем, але найбільш важлива діпстрайк і наша далекобійність. Те, що дійсно впливає на російський потенціал війни та відчутно його знижує. Сьогодні були як виробники відповідної нашої зброї на ставці, так і ті, хто застосовує цю зброю. Збройні сили України, спеціальні служби, розвідка. Головне завдання – масштабувати наші можливості далекобійних українських санкцій. Потенціал для цього є, і спільна розмова всіх разом дуже допомагає. Підготували вже і нашу частину домашньої роботи перед зустрічю з президентом Трампом, військову частину також нашу економічну, всі деталі. Все є. Порядок денний нашої зустрічі з президентом Америки дуже змістовний. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає. Це реально може наблизити завершення війни. Саме Сполучених Штатів є можливість такого глобального впливу, і ми робимо все, щоб інші в світі були по один бік з нами в цій роботі. Зараз наша команда, прем'єр-міністр України, керівник Офісу президента, заступник Міністерства закордонних справ та інші урядовці та український посол вже в Вашингтоні почали зустрічі на своєму рівні і готують основу для розмови з лідером Сполучених Штатів Америки, а також з американськими оборонними компаніями. Зокрема, виробники протиповітряної оборони, також з представниками енергетичних компаній. Була сьогодні вже доповідь наших представників. Дякую за цю роботу. Також сьогодні доповідав керівник Служби зовнішньої розвідки України. Ґрунтовна доповідь і щодо того, як глобальні санкції впливають на Росію та ведуть Росію саме туди, куди треба, щоб вони там втрачали свій агресивний потенціал. І знаємо, як посилити тиск, зробити це. Окремо обговорили також наміри Росії щодо Білорусі. Білоруський суверенітет росіяни вже забрали і тепер хочуть ще й використовувати Білорусь в своїх іграх заради продовження війни. Обов'язково про це попередимо партнерів. Ще кілька речей. Була доповідь головкома та начальника Генерального штабу по фронту, по ситуації в прикордонні, по наших відповідях на російські штурми. Цілком зрозуміло, на яких напрямках зараз найскладніше, і важливо, що наші підрозділи, наші воїни роблять максимум, щоб захистити державу. Кожен контрнаступальний крок України на передовій зараз посилює наші позиції глобально. І це допомагає в тому числі в діалозі з ключовими нашими партнерами. Сьогодні ж продовжили нашу політичну роботу на європейському напрямку. Я говорив з прем'єр-міністром Греції, подякував за підтримку і можемо разом зробити деякі суттєві кроки заради нашої стійкості. В тому числі ми говорили про можливості співпраці в енергетиці, і це, зокрема, можливість постачання американського газу. Домовились ми зустрітись з прем'єром, обговорити всі деталі. Працюємо із різними партнерами в Центральній і Південній Європі щодо програми Pearl, яка дозволяє купувати американську зброю. Важливо, щоб країни приєднувались до цієї програми. Хороші новини щодо цього від країн Північної Європи, і вони вже є. І також я хочу подякувати сьогодні Британії. Є новий санкційний пакет Британії, там десятки осіб, які допомагають Росії воювати, і також там судна російського флоту, який перевозить нафту. Обов'язково синхронізуємо цей пакет в нашій юрисдикції та попрацюємо, щоб і інші партнери однаково тиснули на Росію заради реального закінчення війни. Путін повинен заробляти менше, і тоді безпеки у світі буде більше. А такі речі, як Петріоти та Томагавки, здатні закласти довготривалий фундамент миру. Я дякую всім, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
And with that, folks, that is the end of the news here on day 1330 of the World News Stream. And it's time for us to move on into the second segment of this stream where we get to talk to all of y'all. And I gotta say that tonight's been a crazy night. 85,000 people have watched this stream so far. Y'all have seen us talk about all kinds of crazy things tonight, like the adventures of the United States of America and their endless hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow, who is currently on board the Black Tar, traveling through the area of the Caribbean. Y'all have also heard us talk about all kinds of amazing things, like, for example, Zelensky and his amazing ways with the pianos, sponsored by none other than some others that are involved in the industries that we will not mention here on the air because that might end up YouTube might not like that. We've also talked about all sorts of other things, like everyone's everyone's favorite trade war, along with many other topics that have come from throughout the world across the entirety of the day. We have had a lot to talk about, and it is, of course, time for us to move on into the second segment of the stream where we get to talk to all of y'all. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm about to crack up at the moment because the whole Captain Crack Sparrow thing on the Black Tar is honestly a fairly creative one. But we are going to be making sure to talk to all of y'all in this segment about literally anything and everything. We will be talking about the super chats. We will be talking about the live chats and anything that y'all want to talk about. And hell, we might even pull one out of the live chat here and there in the middle just to spice things up, because a lot of y'all have some incredibly interesting takes in the midst of the question segment that are just pretty cool to talk about. But still, we are going to be making sure to talk about all of it, each and every bit of it. And of course, I hope y'all have an incredibly fun time in this segment. It's honestly our favorite every night, because while the news is our bread and butter, and a lot of y'all are here for that, it is always fun just to get to riff with y'all and talk about whatever, or just come up with jokes on the fly. So with that, Matthew, what do we got? I understand that we have one last poll to cover, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I gotta say the Captain Crack Sparrow thing, that's crazy, honestly. But really, we have no time for it. We got something serious to talk about here in this poll. It says Ukraine says. Also, by the way, I'm joking.
Wait a minute. Was that guy who was like, "Let 1,000 blossoms bloom"? But I'm not going to spend another minute on it because there's another man being eaten to death by a crocodile in the outback or something.
Yeah, stop that. I didn't want you to think I was like taking a shot at your joke or something.
No, dude, if you had put some soul into that, it would have landed, dude, because I knew exactly what you were doing when you're like, we're not going to spin it. And I was like, wait a minute, you're doing it so deadpan, it just sounds real. It's like, it sounds like real frustration. I was like, nah, dude, I was like, doing good. I was like, I knew what you were getting at.
Indeed. But we do have something serious to get to here right here in the poll. It says Ukraine says Russia is making plans in Belarus. That's literally what they said, plans in Belarus. And they've notified NATO of the disturbing info that they're not sharing with the public. And what is it? So 35% said Russia is about to take over Belarus, and that's the big story, while 36% said Belarus is planning to attack Ukraine, and 18% said Belarus is planning to attack NATO. So right now, we don't know what this is. Ukraine has allegedly gotten some very disturbing information that they found so disturbing they're keeping it secret and only telling the NATO officials behind closed doors. So we don't know really what this is. It could be any of these options or maybe even other options, but I would tend to believe, considering the fact that Russia just changed Belarus's law to that way where, I can't remember, it was like the Russian officials can be elected to Belarusian positions or something. It was something like that. It sounds like Russia might be planning to do a soft takeover of Belarus, but that's just purely speculation. I have no idea what Zelensky's talking about, and nobody really does, except for the NATO officials. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would be with a 34% that Russia is probably about to try and annex Belarus. It's highly likely going to happen because Belarus could be classified as a semi-autonomous republic inside of Russia, and Lukashenko could still hold his position a lot like Kadyrov does in Chechnya, pretty much as a dictator of that region with Putin as the overlord, which is pretty much how it works already. So I'd actually say that's probably what's happening right now, because we do know that the Ruski Mir, the Russian world, which is what that is in English, does include Belarus, so eventually at some point Russia is going to have to annex that and make it a part of Russia like everything else. And so that might be what they're working towards right now at the moment, because clearly if you look at everything in Belarus, they might as well already be subordinate of the Russians, practically a part of Russia without it officially being Russian. And so I'd have to say that's probably what they're working towards, is pretty much just moving it into being another semi-autonomous republic of Russia. And while Lukashenko would still be able to hold his at least power on paper and still be a prominent leader and figurehead of the Belarusian state, they still would be a part of Russia under the direct control of Putin, which literally is how it exists right now, pretty much.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, by the way, before we move into our questions tonight, I do want to go over a couple more pieces of news that we were not able to cover during the main segment real quick. I'm just going to quickly touch on them because we can discuss them a little bit further if y'all want, but they're just sort of like minor topics tonight that we had. We did hear today that U.S. officials have doubled Argentina's bailout to $40 billion, by the way, so that way the country can avoid default. So that's a pretty big piece of news. Also, by the way, the U.S. did formally declare a trade war with China today, and they praised the tariff hikes. And And also, the real kicker today is the Pentagon actually formally confiscated the press badges of everybody that did not sign on to that pledge that the Pentagon was demanding that the press signs on to, and they officially kicked them out of their offices today. As you can see right here, these were the press offices, and there's all the logos that were on the doors of the press offices in the Pentagon. So, quite a doozy, I must say. One of the first times, I think that might actually be the first time in history that the press has ever been kicked out of the Pentagon like that. So, disturbing to see, I must say, from a purely journalistic standpoint, this is terrible. It seems like the Pentagon is not backing off this whatsoever. So all these journalists are kicked out. As you can see, they had dedicated offices. They even had like lights on the wall that had on air when they were on the air. This was dedicated. It was a long time office, and they were just kicked out today. So really quite wild to see that, and quite disappointing to see that, I must say. But Enforcer, what say you?
It was very disappointing. Also, by the way, folks, I actually tailored our news to not mention the this as well as the Argentina situation. I just muted those from our news. But that did happen. For some people who were saying, "Oh, this isn't a bailout of Argentina," well, we gave them another $20 billion today. So kind of looking like a bailout. Yeah, it's what it is. And also on top of that, folks, one other thing is the whole deal that happened in the Pentagon today, along with the official declaration of a trade war. The whole deal in the Pentagon, I gotta say, folks, is not good looking at all. Transparency and openness to the press is something that is generally understood to be a fairly American sort of a concept. And I don't really like the idea of kicking media out. And I also have to say this, folks, you have to divorce your personal feelings of the modern media from what we're looking at right now. Because here's what actually happened today. A bunch of people who were in the press, which is a First Amendment protected sort of an activity, have now been restricted from access to the Pentagon, largely regardless of their political affiliation, because they weren't willing to sign a loyalty pledge with the U.S. government on allowing the government to pretty much censor stories and approve stories that they wanted to put out and didn't want to put out. That's pretty much what happened today. Not really a good move. And it's also a fairly concerning one because, that could start to erode away at other freedoms that are protected under the First Amendment, like the freedom of expression or speech in general, because generally that's all kind of balled up into one. If you start to abridge the freedoms of the press, you can easily start to move on to abridging the freedoms of expression and speech in general. So, it's not really a good move. And I also got to say, folks, it's a really bad move when literally everyone's being removed from the Pentagon, including Fox News, which seems to have a lot of favor with the current administration, and they're also being booted out along with everyone else. That's not really a good look. That's incredibly concerning.
Yeah, I would say so, honestly. I'd be very curious to know because I don't talk to these people on a daily basis. I might have talked to maybe a couple of these reporters from maybe once in a while, but not often. But I'd be curious to know how these reporters that were in the Pentagon are going to start reporting on this from this point forward because I still believe they have their job. So the Pentagon reporters that were stationed there, it's like, what are they going to do from this point forward? Are they going to schedule meetings with these Pentagon officials outside the Pentagon? Because I don't think technically these journalists have a right to get into the building anymore. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work. I guess they'll have to set up separate meetings with the people they want to interview outside of it, which is kind of weird. And now they don't have access to actually go to these people's offices to interview them on the spot. Now they have to wait for their office to get in touch with them. They have to get all this correspondence, and that's going to limit the ability to report on this stuff. And I think that was the intent behind it, was to limit this. Because I would say personally, in my personal speculation, I think what led to this right here is because of the Signal Gate problem. I think Signal Gate largely sparked this whole situation, and instead of the government tightening their belt and actually properly having OPSEC, they decided to punish the press instead, which is obviously wrong as hell. I'm very disappointed in this. Every American should be very disappointed in this. This is something that's not strengthening the press; it's only hurting it, and that's not even partisan. That's just objective.
Also saw someone say in the chat, Zajaka say, that's putting it very vaguely at best. It was done to protect against leaks with the Iran bombing. That is not supposed to be punished on the media. because of leaks in the U.S. government. If there's a leak in the U.S. government like that, and they're leaking out classified information, you have to find that leak and then hold that person personally accountable. It's not your fault as a member of the media or a member of the public that someone inside of the U.S. military is deciding to breach their confidentiality agreement with the U.S. government or violate their security clearance by telling you information and whistleblowing about it. That's not the fault of the press. That's the fault of the person who leaked that information to the press, and they're really the only one to be held accountable. That's not a problem of the press. Also, on top of that, you're looking at it in a very one-sided and optimistic sort of a way there, because everything's always a double-edged sword. With this sort of a thing happening now, who's to say that these whistleblowers, when something really bad happens, like, say, for example, let me think of a good one. Let's say with how much the U.S. military or the National Guard is getting involved right now inside of internal U.S. affairs. Let's say one day, if everyone signed this pledge of loyalty to the Department of Defense, let's say one day that there's some sort of a university protest and the National Guard shoots into the crowd and kills a couple of students. And because all of these major news organizations took this pledge of loyalty to the Pentagon, and nobody can cover the story for that matter, then nobody hears about it. What if that happened? And that's not that far to say that it could happen. That actually is what happened at Kent State a couple of decades back, is that the National Guard fired into a crowd of students and killed a couple of them as a result. So that's not something that far out to say that something like that could easily happen. And then because the Pentagon is able to approve and deny stories that are involved with the military in general from being released, they can just deny everyone the ability to release those stories. And pretty much at that point, it's an abridgment of free speech or expression, and also a huge abridgment of the press's rights and abilities to be able to speak on stories whether they're good or not. And I also see some other people who are also saying some counters to us saying this is generally not a good move by saying, oh, these people were un-American. You have a right as an American citizen to hate the United States of America. Like, it sounds counterintuitive, especially what this channel always says, because the Enforcer Matt and myself are very pro-American. But as an American, I understand that it is a right in this country that if you are an American citizen and you want to hate the United States of America, there's not really a lot stopping you, and there shouldn't be a lot stopping you. I generally don't know why people would hate the United States of America, but you still have a right to hate it if you want to. You have a right to think really most of everything that you want to think in this country, whether it seems publicly correct or not. And that's something that you can't really sit there and retaliate on the press for, is by saying we're going to deny them the freedoms of the press because we don't like their opinions or takes on things. You can't really take that sort of a path or a route, because that's a very slippery slope. And
indeed,
and
also by the way, I see some people in here saying, well, they were in there leaking information, and also I see some people trying to explain why the government was trying to have these journalists sign a document saying that they agreed not to disseminate this information. The reason why they had to have them sign that is because there is no law in this country which compels journalists to expose their sources. There's things like journalistic privilege. The journalists do not have to expose their source. That is something that's been established in this country for a very long time, and that's part of the reason why they were trying to get these journalists to sign that document, because there is no law that requires them to disclose that. So that document was going to be the workaround. If these journalists signed that document, they would be binding themselves to adhere to the rules that the DoD came up with on their own accord. So to me, that was a huge red flag. It's like, why do they need to sign a separate document if it's already like enshrined in law? That's because it's not enshrined in law. So that's a huge problem to me. They should not have been asked in the first place to sign a document like that, because if they want to change it, that needs to be done through a legal means, like through the legislature. They can add a law if they want to change that. But for the DoD to go out on their own accord and start trying to ask journalists to sign something, that's wild, like on its face. And also, it's wild what was even in the document. That's even more wild.
And also, I see some people continuously trying to make defenses for this. I would have to be honest with y'all, this is just really an indefensible move that's going on right now with this. I would like to say I could see where people are coming from. I really don't. Because some people are saying, well, I mean, they were just really negative about the United States. And that isn't really an argument. Like, the press can be political if they want to be. Like I don't think people understand this. The only reason that here on this channel we are apolitical, it's because we decided to be. If you want to be the press and you want to have a political leaning, You have the right to do that. There is nothing in the United States of America that says codified in law that the press has to be 100% apolitical, otherwise they're not the press. That doesn't exist. If you want to be far left-leaning, far right-leaning, or anywhere in between, like we are, apolitical, you have a right as a press agency to really pick whatever political affiliation or lack of political affiliation you so desire. If there's an audience out there to listen to your news agency, no matter what your affiliation is, that's your right. Because at this point, folks, with people saying that, oh, well, the problem is them being political. In the future, the problem could be that we're apolitical. How would you like it if the government came down to us and told us, say the current president's in charge, or it was the last president, Biden. If it was Biden, you have to say left-leaning points and say they're great, or you're off air. Or with the current president, you have to say right-leaning points and say they are correct, and that this administration is the greatest, or you're off air. How would you like it if someone forced that onto us here on this channel? I don't think that people ever think about it like that, but the kinds of things that are affecting other people right now can affect you in the future. There's an old poem that someone actually wrote during the times of Nazi Germany where they said, first they came after so-and-so, but I didn't worry because that wasn't me. Then they came after these people. I didn't worry because it wasn't me. Then finally they came after me, and I didn't, and I actually cared for once. And then I looked around for people to care, and nobody else was left but me. That's generally how these sorts of things go. You have to always think, how in the world could this come down the pipe to affect me or to affect all of y'all? A lot of y'all enjoy this show greatly, so you should be concerned about this and care about this a bit, because it could come down the pipe to affect us ourselves and this channel and all of y'all who watch every day directly at some point.
And also, what was the official narrative that was coming out of the DoD, Department of War, whatever you want to call it? What was the reason or the rationale, like in a simple way, they were trying to explain why people should sign that document? Do you remember like what the official narrative was?
I don't even really know, actually.
I think the official narrative, I was trying to get verification on it because I'm trying to remember this from just my own memory, which I have a lot of stuff in my head right now about the whole news situation. I think the narrative was from the Pentagon that they were trying to stop classified information from leaking out. But the problem is disseminating classified information is a crime. And even journalists, they're not exempt from that. So a journalist, and they have done it in the past, journalists have disseminated classified information. They are not immune from prosecution, by the way. They're taking a very big legal risk by doing that. Generally speaking, the courts in the United States have not really prosecuted people, or the prosecution has not really gone after people for that. That journalists, that is. They usually go after the leaker. That's typically the way it's been done. The government will go after and prosecute the leaker of the document, but they won't go after the journalists that disseminated the information. But there's technically no law protecting the journalists in that situation. The journalists can be subject to prosecution. So if the DoD was so worried about these journalists getting their hands on classified information, all they would have to do is simply prosecute the journalists if it really harmed national security that bad, and that's a crime. So, that's a thing. Also, by the way, I just want to add this in as well. There's some officials out there in our government that got caught sending classified information on the wrong medium, which is obviously also a little bit sketchy. I'm not going to go any further than that, but it's a little bit sketchy to be doing that on unauthorized platforms. And that was a whole scandal with that. So loose lips do sink ships, but at the same time, though, we can't sacrifice our constitutional rights because the government isn't competent enough to handle its own classified information. They need to tighten the belt and get a grip.
Also, one last thing. I saw someone say, let's see here. I 100% agree with freedom of the press, but highly disagree with putting American lives at risk just to be the first to put out a story without thinking about who it affects. In that sort of a situation, it's not the press that is putting people's lives in jeopardy. It's the stupid idiot in the Department of Defense that spread that classified information to the press for it to be disseminated to the public. That's who's at fault. That's like saying, man, it's a damn, we need to outlaw fancy cars in this country like Lamborghinis and Ferraris because the carjackings are going through the roof because everyone keeps stealing these fancy cars. We need to take the people who own these sports cars and put them in prison because they're clearly the people who are at fault for all the carjackings because they got nice cars people want to steal. Like, that's the kind of logic that was being used here against the press, which makes no sense. It's like, shouldn't we be blaming the carjacker for stealing the car rather than the person who owns the car? That's the same sort of a thing here. It's not the press's fault that they are the ones disseminating information they're not supposed to have. The fault lies on the person who had that information that was not supposed to disclose that to the press, that disclosed that to the press. That's on them, not really on the press. And I think that's what a lot of people are misunderstanding here with this whole deal. That's where the issue lies, is with the leakers, not the people who are just spreading the news of this leak.
I would say so. And also, by the way, I was trying to do some quick legal research. Also, someone said, "Oh, so you're a lawyer now?" No, I'm not a lawyer, but also at the same time, I have enough sense to be able to read and figure out what this means. And also, I did go through a year of law school, so I'm not totally ignorant on the topic, but I'm not an expert either. But I was reading here, and it looks like generally, I'm speaking about the whole situation with leakers sharing classified information with journalists. It looks like, generally speaking, the court tries to use this basic standard here to determine whether or not publicizing this information poses a clear and present danger to national security. That appears to be the standard right there, is whether or not it poses a clear and present danger. So it's a little sketchy. Like, honestly, if I was a journalist and someone brought me classified information, I would not mess with that personally. I would not mess with it. But some journalists out there apparently think that's okay to mess with that. That's a decision on them. I'm not involved with that, so that's a decision on them. But they can get prosecuted. That's the bottom line. And the government chose to do it because it harmed national security enough. They would apparently be within their rights, according to what I'm reading, to prosecute the leaker and the journalist. But so far, that hasn't happened. The journalists usually are not prosecuted based on what I'm reading.
Frank Lee in the chat said, the press, in all caps, leaked a landing site for our troops in Desert Storm. No, the military officer that told the press about that landing site is the one who leaked that. The press didn't. People have got to get the understanding around. And I got to say this as well. I think that this is a little bit of a detriment that's happened in the modern day. People in the military that are currently serving are not infallible, and they do cause errors, and they do err. And whenever there is a leak of military information to the press, it's not like the press is the freaking KGB and they've broken into the Pentagon and they're going through banker boxes of info to find information they're not allowed to get. Someone from the military called the guy up on a phone and said, "Hey, I want to tell you something cool. Here it is." And then they tell the guy, the press guy, the press editor, whoever it is that got that information, they might not even know it's classified, and then they just put it out. So it's not even the press's fault that they're getting that information. It's whoever is in the military that gave them the information that's at fault. Like, I don't know why people don't understand that. It's more so on the fault of the officer or the serving member of the military that shared that classified information, rather than it is a private citizen who happened to just get the classified information.
What's also interesting is this as well. Sometimes in the past, usually when people leak information that's classified, it's usually because the officer or whoever it was felt that they were violating the law, and that's why they therefore leaked that information that they were not allowed to release to the public or release to the journalist. Usually it's because the person feels like they were violating the law. And in the United States, it is illegal to classify something for the purpose of concealing a crime. That's illegal. So if a federal agency does something that's criminal, and then they say, okay, we're going to classify that because we don't want the public learning about it, and it was illegal, we'll just classify it and we'll brush it under the rug. That is totally illegal. You cannot classify something for that reason. So if someone then went to the media or went to a journalist under that premise, at least in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't think that person would be guilty of that, because it's technically not appropriate to classify something that is concealing a crime. But once again, I'm not a lawyer. You'd have to obviously look deeper into that, and courts might disagree with that. There's no telling, but that's a whole thing as well.
Yeah, I would have to say that it's a fairly interesting sort of a thing. And if you disagree with us, you disagree, and that's fine. One day they'll come for this channel, and you won't even have a live chat to be in to tell us that you disagree with us. That's totally fine. But if you do understand what's going on with that, that's not really a good move. Also, Matthew, do we have any real copy of the loyalty pledge so that way we could just show people what exactly it was?
Let me see if I can get it. I want to make sure it's the real deal too. I don't want to show one that someone just like made up or something. Let's see here. Loyalty pledge from the Pentagon. Let's see here. Did we get a copy of it here? Let's see, the loyalty pledge. So let's see here. It's a 17-page document obtained by NPR, according to NPR right here. Let's see here. How come they're not showing the document? Like, where is it? Let's see. I can't find the document right offhand. That's kind of like a little bit strange, but I'll have to go see if I can find it somewhere else, like the source document. I'll be honest with you, I never actually saw the source document. I just heard people paraphrasing pieces of it, and that's all I ever got. So I'll have to see if I can find it.
Yeah, I was just looking for it as well, and all I could find, man, was every single website on the internet saying, we're not signing that. Like, everyone who was affected by it, we're not signing that, and that's the end of it. Undersigned by every other news organization on the planet, so, little interest. Also, folks, if you don't know how, like, I think this is something else that some people don't understand, because like I got to be honest with y'all. I know that a lot of political opinions go into talking about this sort of stuff because we just know how it is. Like, when we said in the last administration, in Biden's last year of being president, the economy looks like it's not really doing too well and it looks like it's getting worse, which it was. A lot of people want to say it's never been better because it just happened to be a Democrat that was running the country and they like him. So, the economy's never been better, although it is getting worse. Now, in the present day, because Republicans in charge, now the people who are Republicans want to say everything's justified that the president's doing, he never does anything wrong, and nothing's even questionable. But when you look at this on the surface of it, Fox News, which is right-leaning and is heavily favored by the current administration because that's where most of them go in the current administration to talk about anything they're doing, is just the Fox and Fox alone. If they aren't even willing to sign this loyalty pledge, it has to be pretty damn bad. Like, that has to be extremely bad if they weren't willing to sign it and they were also willing to give up their Pentagon press credentials and just leave the place and not sign it. That's got to say something.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not even getting political here, but when everyone across the board doesn't agree to something like that, that's not really a good look, politics or not. But anyways, with that,
Also, by the way, I'm not sure if this is true. I'll be honest with you all. I really can't find the source document of that thing. I've been looking all over the place on the internet trying to find the source document for that loyalty pledge. I see Bobby 43 said the loyalty pledge is a secret. I don't know if it's a real secret or not. I mean, it might be because it doesn't appear that anybody's published the document itself, which is kind of strange to me. Usually they provide a link to the document or they'll show the document or something. It looks like all the articles simply paraphrase it, and that's it.
yeah, I don't really see it out there either, so I guess it has to be secret. And they were also told if this was disseminated to the public, then you'll also get in trouble, I'm guessing, because it doesn't appear that anyone has a copy of it that I can find either on the internet, which is also quite questionable as well, because shouldn't the public know what's in that as well? That's a little bit weird. But anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that somewhat well, at least the best we could off of our opinion, considering that we're also involved in news coverage as well. But with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, some people are saying they're joking. I mean, I don't know if it's a joke, honestly, or not, because I can't find it anywhere. But anyways, moving on from that, we're going to move on to our questions. We got a lot of good questions right here, folks. So jumping into our first Super Chat, the last segment, this one goes to W Sub C, who puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, good sir, for that support. And he said, do the rules of it's okay to eliminate with only suspicion for foreign terror groups, does that apply to domestic groups and protesters suspected of affiliation? No, that does not. That is absolutely does not. Due process is in effect in the United States. So even if someone is a member of a domestic terror group, they have the right to due process in the United States. But the problem is, though, down in Venezuela, that's obviously not the United States. It's in international waters is where these strikes are being conducted, and the same rules do not apply out there. That doesn't mean I think the government should have a blank check, but technically it's not the same thing. But Enforcer, what say you?
It's a very different thing. Domestic terrorists are treated totally different than foreign terrorists that are outside of the United States jurisdiction. Foreign terrorists that are outside of the United States jurisdiction are generally dealt with an iron fist, and we usually just obliterate them with some form of a drone strike or some form of military action. Domestic terrorists are treated with white gloves. So we give them the full breadth of the law. We go in and have an informant go in and listen to them and see if they're conducting any sort of illegal crimes, and then we, RICO act them or some other action along those lines, and we actually deal with them through a judicial process. But I do have to point out to folks that domestic terrorism is a thing. Like, people, on the modern thing, some people go, this group is or isn't, and I'm not going to get into the particular group, is or isn't a terrorist group. But having dealt, like me personally, and Enforcer Matt as well, I think can kind of talk about this, having dealt with some people who are in that group, just by running this channel, I can kind of lean towards the fact that they do largely fit that category of being a terrorist group, because we were terrorized for about a year and a half straight by one of those people along with all their followers here on YouTube. So I would not actually say that was that far off from deeming them a group like that, because they went to the absolute extreme lengths of terrorism to the point of trying to destroy our lives through multiple different ways and means, just because for some reason this guy just happened not to like us for whatever reason. And so like
Well, a domestic terror designation, that's something that's a government designation. That's something that they put on people. So unless the government designates them that, then they're not considered that. It's not something that's really subjective.
Interesting. So what are you trying to say about that particular instance?
So basically, unless the government has that group on a list, then that group is not a domestic terror organization. It has to be on the government's list. That's not a loose term. That's a legal term, actually.
So I would have to say, just to saying it outright, isn't Antifa declared a terrorist group at this point, a domestic one?
I believe, according to what I know, I think the last time I checked, I think they were recently declared a terror organization, a domestic terror organization. But I can't tell you that for certain, but I believe it is the case, yeah.
Yeah, well, then that means that, at least from what I would know, if I'm not mistaken, the guy we're talking about in particular, who I believe is a member of that group, would kind of fall under that criteria, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if he is or not, to be honest with you.
We'll have to look into that one a little bit more. But generally, I would say that's not that far off, at least with the designation that's been made recently. Because if like, I'll be honest with y'all, if y'all think about it, any group at all that's on any fringe end, like here's how I look at it, folks, like Antifa, the Proud Boys, so on and so forth, people like that on the extreme fringes, they're not good groups. Like generally speaking, they usually team together not for good means. It's not to just push forward some sort of a political ideology. It's really more so to push forward some sort of get through you want through fear sort of a deal. And I haven't really seen any of those groups operate that much differently off of that regard. That's usually why I don't consider. And also on top of that, folks, these people aren't exactly like, down like just slightly off to the left or the right. All these groups are off to the far left or the far right, and they go straight into radicalism. I mean, there's really not even an argument to be had there. And so that would be my 2 cents on it. And also, even still, they get treated differently. Like hell, you can look at all of the terrorist groups that have domestic ones at least, that have existed in prior decades. The best examples I could come up with would be the Black Panther Party for one that leaned towards the far left, and the KKK for one that leaned towards the far right. They always get white glove treatment by the government. They have to bring in informants. They have to gather information. They have to make sure that they're suspected of committing some form of a crime or trying to conduct some forms of domestic terrorism. And then they get caught, most likely about to conduct that crime, or they conducted the crime and they get caught, and then they're held accountable by the laws of the United States. You're never going to see a domestic terrorist group get drone striked. That's never going to happen. So it's a totally different level of treatment that domestic terrorist groups get over foreign domestic terrorist groups. Well, not foreign domestic, but foreign terrorist groups. So I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. And I hope that it addresses the question the best we can, because by the law, nothing crazy like a drone strike's ever going to happen on a domestic terrorist group or anything along those lines. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
Let's see here. I was just checking the FBI's website because I was curious if they have a definition. They have a definition on their site here. A definition of domestic terrorism. They say violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or an environmental nature. That's quite interesting. I'm not sure if that's a legal definition or that's just the FBI subjective definition, but interesting. Criminal acts. Honestly, that sounds like organized crime, honestly. Like, it sounds like something you'd prosecute under the RICO Act.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Something like that. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting there. I don't know how they distinguish it from simple organized crime. It's like they're making a different designation for domestic terrorism, but it just sounds like organized crime. So let's see here. I'm trying to find some more information here about it. So that's the only definition they have on their site. So honestly, that's a pretty wide-ranging definition there. I mean, a lot of groups could qualify for that under that loose definition. So that's quite interesting there.
Also, I saw someone say something what terrorism has Antifa done? I mean, hell, if you really want to get into it, like, like any other domestic terrorist group, there's a great deal. Like whenever you see these groups, because some people think, oh, this is like a little brawl. Whenever you see a group like that go out with all of their imagery and symbolism clearly showing they're a part of Antifa, and then they get involved in any sort of a physical altercation with another group, whether they're counter protesting or not, that is unlawful. Like any sort of physical violence, like assault and battery, that is an unlawful act. And especially leveraged in mass to try and break up another protest or a public assembly through unpeaceable means, you can largely start to say if that's what that group does all the time, that is largely getting into the realm of domestic terrorism, using threats of harm or actual implementations of harm to try and scare people into stating their political opinions. Those sorts of things do get in that line. Like, for example, the other domestic terrorist groups, this one is definitely one of the best ones I can say, because in the South there's a load of history of them. The KKK went around during the 1960s in the Civil Rights Movement and was bombing buses, executing people on the side of the street that were part of the Civil Rights Movement, and so on and so forth. And clearly, that is domestic terrorism by every single measure. It meets every single requirement for it. That's why they are labeled that to this day. And that's also why their membership dropped off massively, is because after they were declared a domestic terrorist group, no one wanted to touch them. Even the people who were a part of the Klan didn't want to be a part of it any longer because they didn't want to be designated domestic terrorist. Same thing with the Black Panther Party, which also did very similar actions to that, bombings and such. And even at one point, the Black Panther Party actually took over the state of California's Capitol building and held it for about several weeks in the 1980s. It was very early 80s, which is actually one of the reasons for the National Firearms Act of 1985. If y'all don't know, it was actually heavily brought up in the debates in Congress to pass that act. On top of that, another thing, at least as far as one more thing that I could bring up that Antifa did that definitely is very questionable to the point it is getting towards insurrection. When they created the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ or CHOP or whatever it was called, that technically, if you want to look at that by the letter of the law, was an insurrection, because they completely stopped any form of law enforcement or public civil services from operating within that area. It literally operated, for the time it existed, outside of the control of the state government of the state of Washington, or the federal government for that matter. So it may as well have been an insurrection at that point.
Here's my question. And once again, folks, I'm not trying to get political with this. I generally am trying to understand, because I am familiar with these groups that cause trouble across America, but I don't know a lot about them, enough to say that I know intimately what these groups are about. But specifically this Antifa group, or Antifa, whatever it's called, I see here in the executive order from the White House, they describe Antifa as a militarist anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, law enforcement authorities, and our system of law. So they're saying it's an enterprise, kind of saying that it's a criminal organization. So what is the structure? Because typically when the government has gone after, for example, the Italian mob families, they do lay out exactly who's at the top, who's the underlings of the boss, and things like that. There's a structure to it, and they designate who these individuals are. But I've not yet seen any type of actual, like, a leadership tree that's been created by these organizations, the law enforcement in this country, showing who runs this organization. That's my question. I'm not saying the group doesn't exist. I'm simply saying where's the naming of the leaders of this organization? I haven't seen that personally. And also, by the way, domestic terrorism is a felony in America. I found that actually is a codified offense. It's a felony offense under both federal and state laws. So it's a serious crime right there. So I just don't understand how RICO is different from the crime of domestic terrorism. It seems almost identical if they're alleging it's a criminal enterprise of sorts.
That is a fairly interesting. It sounds like they're trying to set it up for like some sort of a RICO law deal in the future. And also, I see a lot of people saying Antifa isn't centrally organized. From what we understand, I think, Matthew, there was some sort of an undercover reporter that actually investigated that, and that's not necessarily the case. There is actually some loose organization involved in that group, from what we can tell. It
would make sense. I mean, how does a group operate completely decentralized? That wouldn't make much sense. So there must be some loose organization of some sort, but there has to be. Like, I know some people are saying it's not, but how are they operating if they don't have a leader? Like, groups don't operate without leadership.
Yeah, like that's I would have to say that's definitely true because what other group in America, folks, that's ever been political? I mean, look at them from all ends. You know, let's see, you would have the Proud Boys on the right, the Black Panther Party on the far left back in the day, the KKK on the far right back in pretty much through most of history, even still to this day to some degree. They all have some form of organization. You know, they all have some leader. They're all centralized to some degree. Why in the world would this one be non-centralized to the point that there is no form of even loose leadership or centralized leadership to some degree? That would be a extreme outlier. There really is no group that exists like that. How in the world at that point do they even organize to show up in mass anywhere to conduct a counter protest or a protest in the first place? That would be a little bit odd. Like that would be quite weird. Like how in the world do they even get everyone in a single group considering that they would be that disorganized?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other argument some people are making, and this is the last point I make on this, and then we can move on from it. But the last point I want to make personally was I see some people saying that people simply show up to these protests and then they choose to identify as a member of that group that by just holding a sign saying they are in the group. But the problem is, though, I mean, that works to a certain degree, that explanation does, but also someone had to create the signs that they're holding that says that they are a member of that group. Who did that? Also, someone had to let them know that they were going to be there on that day and they had to show up on that day. So I don't know enough about it to say for a fact how it works. I don't even really know anything about the group, to be honest with you. I've just heard its name thrown around out there, and that's about it. So the only thing I'm concerned about is this. I just want to make sure that the First Amendment is not infringed upon. And whatever the case is, people have a right to protest, but they don't have a right to commit crimes. If you're committing crimes, then you should be arrested. That's the bottom line. But people do have a right to protest. So that's where I stand on it. I don't really know enough about this Antifa group to even comment on it, really. I'm just sort of doing a quick research on it.
And also, one more thing I want to say, folks, not trying to get political here, and, you know, with this conversation that we've been having, but I'm not really a big fan of any extremist group. And a lot of people go, well, they're anti-fascist. Isn't that good? Well, I mean, they're anti-fascist, sure, but they're practically communist at the same time. I mean, that's like one of the big things about their group historically. Like, for example, in Britain, when they went up against Oswald Mosley and his fascist party in Britain, they were pretty much on the same token advocating for communism, another extremely bad form of extremism. So it's like if you are a genocidal maniac, but you happen to oppose the different faction of genocidal maniacs, are you really any better than them, or are you just a different flavor of genocidal maniac? And I'd have to go with the latter rather than the former. I mean, neither group is incredibly good. Like, you know, like I don't sit here and go, well, I mean, you know, like if you look at like no, like they're both incredibly bad groups, and on top of that, if you look at most of their normal operations, there's always some form of intimidation or threat of harm to anyone they disagree with anywhere, whether it's that group or any other of these groups that we've mentioned. They always work off of that. That is not at all an American sort of an idea, and it does not promote public political discourse in any sort of a way. So you know that's what my honest truth would have to be on that. And you know, so before people go and sit there and go, wait a minute, if you're not anti-fascist and you don't agree with them, then you're obviously a fascist. No, I just don't really like extremists in general, and they're extremists, and I'm not really a big fan of them either. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address the best can. And before anyone says that the U.S. Army, because I saw this brought up a couple of times, that the U.S. Army was Antifa in World War II, no, they weren't. We were fighting a fascist-led Nazi German government, but that does not mean that we all joined in America, the political organization Antifa. That did not happen. Antifa has existed for an incredibly long time. It's existed since the 1920s and 30s, and it began in Weimar Germany as a counter to the Nazis and their fascist movements. They've been around for a while, and they had no involvement or really any dealings in the U.S. government or really any allied government during that period, and usually were still looked at by everyone as a fringe group of extremist, violent communists, and that's also why generally a decent amount of those people ended up going in front of the House Un-Americans Activities Committee after the war in the 50s during the McCarthyism era, because a lot of them pretty much leaned straight into communism as a result of their anti-fascism. So they just rejected one extreme and hopped straight into the pot with another one and boiled with them. So really no difference between the two groups from what I'd say. Both of them are nuts. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next super chat here goes to Bobby43, and he puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, Bobby, also known as LC39A, for that $50 support. And we do appreciate that. Very generous
Hey!
support. He said, I said it as a joke, and it seems to be true. LOL. Honestly, Bobby, I can't tell what the deal is with it. I know you said it as a joke, but it might actually be at least somewhat close to the truth, because I'm not sure why the media has not published that pledge for the people to read. If it's out there, I can't find it really easily, and it must be buried deep in the interwebs. So I don't know. To be honest with you, it's a little bit interesting. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I'd have to thank you massively for the support, Bobby43. And I think that your joke actually ended up might possibly being true, because I couldn't find it either. And I still was trying to look for it a second ago, and I still could not find the thing. So I think you might actually be right on that. But a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And a massive thanks to you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would never been able to make this channel possible, and we wouldn't be able to make it possible to this day. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Chicken Fired Jenna Tolls with some fixings. Thank you very much for that support, by the way. They put in a $20 donation. Chicken fried or chicken fired. That's very interesting. Adding a lot of adjectives to the front of it. And he said, take one from the chat. And we shall grab one from the chat. And thank you very much, Jenna, with the chicken fried for that support. And we do have the live chat, which goes to none other than Activista, who said, since we are conducting operations in Venezuela, are the boat terrorists now considered enemy combatants?
To a degree, we're considering them as enemy combatants at this point. From what I understand, that seems to be the Department of Defense's standpoint on the situation right now, is that they are armed combatants, and that's also why we're dealing with them the way we are. So I do thank you massively for the support, and I hope that does address that well, at least the best we can. And with that, we are going to be moving on to the next. Also, by the way, really quickly, got to bring this up, got to bring it up. Just really quickly, pulled up the Wikipedia on Antifa, because some people said, wait a minute, why aren't you anti-fascist? Because if you're a part of Antifa, you end up being an anarchist, a communist, and a socialist. So obviously, in my attempt to be against fascism, I'm not going to jump into the other genocidal maniac team of communists and socialists. It seems to be counterproductive to the whole idea of this being America. America isn't communist, it's not socialist, it's not fascist. We're Americans. We operate on a constitutional republic, democratic system with a capitalist economy. That's what I stand for, and so Antifa is not for me, and neither are all of the other crazy fascist groups that Antifa goes up against. Both of them are nuts, and I'm not for either one of them. So that's clearly why I'm never going to say Antifa has a point, because their argument against fascism is the next insane group, which is communism. So there's your 2 cents on my opinion about that group. Anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Alex K. And Alex puts in a 20 and says, for the P8 Poseidon Fund.
And I thank you so much for the support. And everyone always needs a PA Poseidon. We always need to. The Lee Spring Army has to conduct anti-submarine warfare against the Russians. It's what we have to do. And I thank you for supporting the PA Poseidon Fund, because the U.S. Navy needs another one. In fact, they need about 20 more. And maybe one day the Lee Spring Army can lobby for the Navy to get another 20 PA Poseidons. What could hurt to have one more? And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least the best we can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Old Warrior, and Old Warrior puts in a 20. And thank you very much, good sir, Old Warrior, for being a longtime channel legend and supporting the channel yet again. He said, I just watched a great vid about a not-so-great locomotive, the Soviet AA-20, and are you familiar with it? It was a 414-4 config, and it was so long that they had to make the main drive wheels flangless.
Yes, I do know about it. It is a terrible engine. It's terrible. I hate it. I honestly hate everything about Soviet railroads and Russian railroads. They're terrible. Even today, they're terrible. But this was the worst idea they ever had. They made one of them, and they scrapped it right afterwards because it failed in every way. It was too heavy. It would rip the tracks apart everywhere it went. If there was a turn, pray to God it does not derail. All of the middle driving axles are flangeless, so that also led to increased derailments. The boiler was huge. Well, the firebox specifically was freaking massive. Because if y'all don't know, Russian coal sucks really badly, and it's really bad for heat content, so you have to put a load of it into a boiler to get any sort of actual heat. So this thing only operated at slow speeds because they were not able to get enough heat to boil the water at a large enough rate, I guess you could say, to actually get enough steam to run this thing at high speeds. So I think the fastest this thing would normally run was like 15 to 18 miles an hour, which is insanely slow for most everything. In America, during that same period, the common sort of freight speed, and this is low speed freight, was around 40 to 45 miles an hour. Usually high speed freights could get all the way up to 70, which is incredibly fast. That's still what we do nowadays in this country. This thing is terrible. It sucked so much. They abandoned it, scrapped it, and all that. But it's a terrible engine. I wish I could go over all the details. I don't remember them by heart. I just remember that this thing is the worst. It was designed in the Stalin era. That's also why it was the worst. But it wasn't the only thing that they did in the Soviet era that was stupid. They also had this plane that was made around the same time called the TB-3, which was designed as an aircraft carrier of the Soviet Air Force. So it would carry a couple of Chaikas under the wings, and they would drop them off in the middle of the skies like an aircraft carrier to extend the range of their aircraft. So kind of like a Ukrainian Baba Yaga these days almost, but in the Soviet form. And these things were obviously obsolete by the beginning of World War II and were hardly ever used. You can also see one here modeled by Zvezda or Zveno, which is a model company, also carrying the additional 2 aircraft that it could carry as well. This rarely ever worked in real life. Surprise, surprise. But anyways, a huge thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address it the best we can. And I hope that was an interesting little bit of a side note about the AA-20, which was absolutely terrible in my opinion. And I think it is another godless design of the Soviet Union. But a huge thanks to you once again. And we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next super chat is going to go to John King, and John put in a 20, and thank you very much, John, for that support as well. He said, how will Ukraine launch Tomahawk missiles? The U.S. doesn't have many available.
We might make them a specialized ground launch platform, or they might make their own. That's generally what we're assuming at the moment right now. But at the moment, we do not know of any means or abilities that the Ukrainians would have to actually launch them themselves. So I hope that has addressed it the best it can. A big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Dave W. And thank you very much, Dave, for that $20 support as well. He said, has there been increased activity at Camp Lejeune or Fort Bragg, where the airborne troops are based?
Generally, we don't talk about domestic military movements for operational security purposes. That's where we actually draw the line. So unfortunately, I cannot really speak to that, whether we would know or not know about any U.S. military movements at either of those facilities. But Fort Bragg is quite an interesting place. Everyone always talks about Fort Bragg, not in good ways. Everyone always usually has very bad stuff to say about Fort Bragg. But here it is, right here. It's right outside of the city of Fayetteville. Right up here. This is where a lot of the U.S. airborne, or the U.S. Army airborne forces are based out of, like the 82nd and others. So pretty cool. Although the 82nd actually did a rotation over to Romania a while ago, it was like a year ago. I think they're back here at the moment, but we cannot really speak about those sorts of movements because those actually would be operational security issues. And while we don't have to really ensure operational security of the U.S. military, we still like to operate with some goodwill towards them, considering that I have a lot of friends who are in the military and I don't want to, possibly put them in harm's way by giving out too much information. But still, a big thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Ride 34 Life 3, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, good sir, for that support. Formerly known as Char G, he says. And it's good to see you, Char G. And he's changed his name. He said, keep up the good work, boys. And here's a little something to keep the heat on, as winter is just around the corner. And LLT, LLC.
Thank you so much for the support, helping us to keep the coal burning and the lights on. You help us to stay warm in the winters, and the winters, I've heard, are going to be brutal. Brutal, I tell you, out in Salt Lake City. I've heard that it gets cold here and that it snows. And me, as a southern boy, I don't know a damn thing about snow. I've actually heard of that at some point, and I thought it was that stuff that comes on them damn boats off of the Gulf up here in the Alabama that people snort. I don't know what snow is, really. I don't know a damn thing about it. They say it's this stuff that covers the ground, and it's made of ice, like shaved ice you get out of a cup at a snow cone store, and I've never heard of nothing like that in my life. And then I gotta tell you something, folks. I just saw a mountain that's named after after Lex Luthor. They called it White Baldy. Look at that right there, named after Lex Luthor. Crazy right there, crazy. But beyond that, snow scares me. I don't know what the hell that shit is, and I hope I don't die if it falls on top of me. But beyond that, I'm just kidding, folks. We've had it snow here a couple of times, very rarely, and it's usually less than an inch thick whenever it falls. But I'll be honest with y'all, that is one thing I'm kind of getting a little bit concerned about now. I don't know a damn thing about snow really in large amounts, and now Matthew, me, you've been talking about, it's like, how much does it snow out in Salt Lake? And that's something we're going to have to find out. But still, a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that the best we possibly can. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on into the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to John Murray, who puts in a 20, and thank you very much, John, for that support as well. He said, do people not realize how war works? And some don't, but he said, it's messy, it's imperfect. We don't line up across from each other in a field and look at each other in the eye and do the do anymore. PID isn't always guaranteed. And PID? What does he mean by that? PID, tell me, Enforcer.
That stands for positive identification, which means that the person that you were about to target and shoot has been 100% confirmed as an enemy armed combatant.
Well, if I do recall properly, one of the main things in the Middle East when the U.S. was over there and really fighting hard and slogging it out inside of Afghanistan was they were very strict about the rules of engagement and positive identification. So I don't know. Like I think generally speaking that we should be very, very keen to have positive identification because you don't want to be willy-nilly because I know people these days have generally gotten, desensitized to the whole thing of war, but we don't want to get to the point where we're operating like Russia. We want to make sure that we still have our morals intact and also still have some sense of civility, even in war, because we want to be different than the enemy, or otherwise what are we fighting for? But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I would agree that war is a nasty business. That's something that a lot of people don't really know, is that no matter how much we try to clean up the whole side of, don't kill the civilians, don't have collateral, there will always be collateral. And that's usually why we want to avoid war. It's always going to be a nasty business. And when you really, beyond us cheerleading the Ukrainians in the war in Ukraine, which we've been doing for a long time, and beyond us just trying to keep up a light and cheery tone on air about the whole thing so that way everyone doesn't get emotionally overloaded by the whole deal, war is actually quite a nasty business. We see it firsthand every day before we come on air making this news. And there are people who get gored and killed that weren't even supposed to be gored and killed in the worst ways, and the people who were in the military get gored and killed in the worst ways. War is a horrendous thing. And I would have to agree with you on that. However, we should always be trying to work as hard as we can to make war as civil as it can be. I mean, a lot of people here in the West nowadays don't really get this, but we're not animals. We're not cavemen of, 40,000 BC killing each other with spears made out of rocks. I mean, we live in civilized societies these days, and we have a much greater aptitude of knowledge and reason than a lot of people before us have ever had, because they just didn't have the accumulated knowledge and learning or experience to learn available to be able to be who we are today. And for that reason, I think that we should use our civilized natures as a civilized nation to ensure that whenever we wage war, we are conducting it in the most civilized manner possible. Even if it means that we sometimes have to tie our hand behind our back here and there a little bit to do it, I still think that that's something that we should try and do. And I know that someone's about to say, well, when you're under fire, and I know, it's a totally different equation when you're under fire, but at the same time, my counter to that statement is, well, if you're as good a soldier as you say you are, being under fire should certainly be stressful, I would say, but at the same time, we should be professional enough to not end up causing significant collateral as well. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. Because, and also, folks, I've got to say this as well. Everyone wants to always say, or everyone always wants to butt that, go, oh, what the hell with it, level it. What if you were the person who was in that town and the role was reversed and that was an enemy army and they were about to say, level all of you and lay you to waste? Would you want them to say that, or would you want them to also treat you with white gloves? Always think about it in the reverse. Think of it, like, honestly, the best way I can think of saying it, think of it as that Twilight Zone episode from the original Twilight Zone where the Japanese soldiers were holed up in that cave at the end of the war, and the American officer said, let's just grease them and, bring up a flamethrower and get that whole thing over with. And then it flipped to where he was a Japanese officer in the Japanese army at the beginning of World War II, and it was a bunch of Americans in that same cave, and then he was having a debate about whether or not to go along with his superior Japanese officer and just grease those guys inside the cave or not. Always think about it like that. You always want to have enough civility that if the roles were reversed, you would go, I would hope they would do the same thing to me that I do unto them. That's really the truth of it. But anyways, even if they're not doing that, you still want to act on that sort of a level. But anyways, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my personal opinion. But a huge thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep it running. But I definitely do see where you're coming from, but that would be my counter. But a huge thanks once again. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Margaret Hemsley, who puts in a 31 Australian. And thank you very much, Margaret, for that support, by the way. And we do appreciate that very, very much, all the way from Australia. And Margaret said, finally have money to send. And if lives are lost by Russia and NATO countries, is that a last straw for Article 5 to be invoked? And what else would it take?
If that didn't work, I don't know what else would work. Like, if that didn't force us into an Article 5 invocation, nothing would at that point. So I would have to say that probably will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because if it wasn't, I would be greatly disappointed in our leadership across the entire Western sphere completely. To the point that might actually leave me disillusioned, because if they're not willing to protect the citizenry of the very nations that they are the elected representatives of, then what are they even here for at that point? So with that, I hope that does address it the best I possibly can. And a huge thanks to you, Margaret Hemsley, for being an old guard and a channel legend, by the way. And also thank you for supporting the channel. We got to thank you greatly, because no one ever has to support the channel, and yet you always go out of your way to support the channel whenever you can. I got to thank you massively for that, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to keep this channel possible and keep it running for years. So a big thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to BC Skyman, the channel legend, and he puts in a $20 support. And thank you very much, BC, for supporting the channel yet again. I think he's already left the night. Actually, he left early, I think, for the night. If I can speak, I'm just struggling with this whole thing called English. But thank you very much, BC, for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I would have to say a big thanks to you for the support, BC Scam, and another old guard and a channel legend, and great to have you here tonight. I hope you enjoyed the stream while you're here, and if you're still here, thank you for still sticking with us. And I gotta say, it's always great to have you here with us, and I hope you've been having a good time recently. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, also, someone said, believing that war can never be in any way civilized comes from a misunderstanding of what war is. No, it doesn't, because historically we have made war more civilized. Do we, let me ask this in a sense. When the U.S. Army, which fought in World War II, liberated towns in France, did we go through everyone's private belongings and loot their houses of everything of value, and also take the women and violate them to the most extreme forms of carnal crimes that could be conducted? And the answer was usually no. And whenever something like that did happen, we would find those men, we would try them, and we would hang them for conducting extreme crimes. That's what we did back in the day. There was a lot of U.S. soldiers that were hanged for those crimes during that time. So no, war has become a lot more civil, because if you look at World War II and how we acted in World War II as a democratic nation, a civilized nation, versus, say, any European nation from the Middle Ages, we were far more civilized in how we would liberate or conquer an area than any medieval army was of a different era several hundred years before. And if you look at how the U.S. Army operated inside of Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, we were even more civilized than the U.S. military during the Second World War. So there is always an ability to become more civilized. It's just about the enforcement of that and the continuance of that enforcement to ensure that it does not become a debauchery of barbarism in the midst of something such as a war that has to be fought and must be done, and not to turn it into some sort of an uncivilized display. But I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one here, we are jumping into this one, which goes to Jake Robinson, who puts in a 20. And Jake said, into coffee funds, Enforcer Matt, Enforcer, good evening from Canada and LSA.
Hey, and a good evening to Canada. I hope y'all are doing good up there. And I hope y'all are dressing warm, because it's apparently cold up there. But I do thank you so much for the support and enjoying the channel and helping it to keep on running. And of course, being a part of the LSA Canada division. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And we also have a 20 from Military Cyborg. And thank you, good sir Cyborg, for that $20 support. He said, another night, another donation, another one. I can't donate 20 billion, but here is something. And take one from the chat. Hashtag veteran, hashtag LSA, hashtag Slava Ukraine.
Thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I got to say, long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And I got to thank you so much once again for enjoying the channel and helping us to keep this thing running, because it is folks like you who have helped to make this thing possible and help this thing to keep on rolling. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And the live chat question goes to Marion Deemer, who said, how does anyone know the boats are drug boats and not high-sea fishing boats? That's the golden question right now. That is the golden crust, as you could say at this point. Nobody knows the MO, the modus operandi for the U.S. military right now. We are assuming and hoping that the U.S. military is doing proper positive identification and proper rules of engagement to make sure that these drug boats are, in fact, narco-terrorist boats. So right now, there's nothing showing that they have neglected their duty to do that, but we haven't gotten any reassuring statements either, at least in my opinion. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would actually have to agree with Enforcer Man on that. We get statements from the government that these are not fishing boats and they are narco boats, but they don't really provide any sort of statements to the public that would ease any sort of concerns that it might still be the alternate answer, which is that they are fishing boats. So I'd have to say that there definitely needs to be some sort of proof given for that as well. I'd have to agree with that. But I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also...
real quick. Do you think, I see people mentioning the outboards. Do you think that the 4 like really large outboards is proof enough that it's a drug boat? Like, I mean, personally, I would say that's strong supporting evidence that it's probably some sort of drug boat, because what type of fisherman needs like 1,000 horsepower? Like, what kind of fish are they running after? Like freaking like jumbo tuna or something? I mean, what are they fishing?
Well,
I don't really know why you need outboards that large.
I'd say that number of outboards on a single boat would definitely start to lead towards the reasonable suspicion that it is involved in some sort of narcotics operations and requires the speed. But at the same time, there has to be some sort of further proof than that. Because what if it's just some wildly successful fisherman and they decide to spend their money on pimping out their boat so that way they could take it out for pleasure rides with their friends on the weekends, say, somehow they actually made it and they just added a whole bunch of motors to the boat so that way they could also use it for leisure when they're not working as a fisherman. It's like there could be an argument made that might be the case. And so it's like we need to make sure that we don't just have one supporting piece of evidence, which is the large amount of high power outboard motors. We need to have additional evidence, like the clear evidence or visual confirmation of contraband on board, possibly armed individuals on board, something along those lines at least, or at least meet those 2 or 3 criteria at best to be able to say we have enough reasonable suspicion due to the fact that they're armed, due to the fact that they're carrying contraband, and due to the fact of the large amount of upgrades the vessel has taken to undertake heavy speeds, that due to all of these 3 factors, we can confirm with a high amount of certainty that they are involved in illegal activities, and for that reason, we authorize the strike.
Yeah, they got to have something. Me personally, I prefer they know who's on the boat. Me personally, like obviously, if you have a boat that looks like it's like some cheap fishing boat with like 4 large, huge outboard motors attached, that's already a little bit fishy in itself. And then also, if you have cargo that's sitting on the bottom of the boat, like the boat hull, that looks like bricks of white substance, that's also a pretty strong indicator that something's not right. And also, if there's no fishing gear on board, that's another bad sign. But I don't know.
I have an idea. What if we issued an edict? Nothing that's encoded or codified in law, but what if the executive office issued an edict to be dispensed throughout the areas of Central and South America, that any vessels that are operating within the territorial waters of Venezuela or Colombia, or generally just Venezuela, or for that matter in international waters within the Caribbean Sea, that have any number of outboard motors in excess of 2, will be deemed to be involved in narco-terrorist operations and will be dealt with accordingly. And if one would seek to not, pretty much be the recipient of the ire of the U.S. Armed Forces, they will remove any excess of outboard motors beyond the number of 2. Just issue an edict like that. And if anyone else has more than 4 outboard motors, you can just be guaranteed at that point, surefire. If they're not listening to a U.S. edict telling them we're going to airstrike you if you do not if you have more than 2 outboard motors, and they still have more than 2 outboard motors, clearly they're not concerned about violating the law, or they're part of some sort of a illegal cartel operation by default at that point. And then we have the Koreans to be able to strike them. You could do something like that.
Yeah, maybe so, possibly. I don't think there's a lot of boat racing or boat racers that go into international waters from Venezuela. I don't think there is such a thing like that. I see some people saying, well, maybe there's like boat enthusiasts or something. But the problem is this, though. These boat enthusiasts that you're talking about, they're taking these cheap fishing boats out with like $100,000 worth of outboard motors in the back, and they're hauling ass right through the middle of U.S. Navy vessels. So, I mean, what normal civilian takes a risk like that? I mean, that seems like most people would see the Navy vessels or know that the Navy vessels are out there and in the vicinity of Venezuela, and they would say, "Oh, hell no, I'm not going out there. I'm not tangling up with the U.S. Navy. I'm going to just like stay within Venezuelan waters. I'm not going to go out there and see if I can get messed up by the U.S. Navy." So, whatever these guys are doing, they must have some big reward to doing it, or otherwise they wouldn't take that huge risk. But it would still be nice, though, for the military to explain how they're choosing to target these people instead of just telling us to trust me, bro.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And also I saw someone earlier in the chat. I gotta address this. This was interesting. Someone said, I won't mention a name on this one, but I will mention what they said. They said, I'm of the same opinion, but what started the actions by Antifa was the police targeting and killing specific individuals in America. Seems specifically wrong to target these people out of their way, but what do I know? But the thing is about that, I don't really understand what you're getting at there. So you're saying that one wrong of a police officer, justifies the wrong of some sort of a band of people to go around and pretty much conduct vigilante justice, which I don't really understand. If we're talking at that sort of a premise, and this is this is not political, this is just my moral take on that. Let's speak about that particular instance, which happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, where a man was arrested by police and died while in their custody. This is what you're generally talking about. I'm not going to speak of the name or anything, because then everyone's going to get, Pavloved into giving their political opinion immediately. But let's just talk about that specifically. So that was immediately dealt with. It went national, and I believe that most of the officers involved in that were punished according to the law, properly. So the wrong was immediately rectified by punishing those who conducted the wrong. So what would justify Antifa at that point running rampant around the country? That wouldn't really make too much sense to me. It really does. There's no way to justify that for any group. You just go through the processes that we have in this country to hold people accountable for their wrongdoings, and that's that. That's just generally how that works. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one goes to Robert Krogan, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Robert, for that $10 support. He said, moving day is coming soon, so here's a little something.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, and thank you for helping us out on the eventual moving day. And so a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, man, some of these topics, man, I'm not going to lie, like some of these are inviting like bad politics in the chat. Like I can't really stop the politics on those, like that last topic.
Man, I was keeping it as generic as I could, but still, I was trying to say 2 wrongs don't make a right, basically. Just because something wrong happens in this country doesn't give everyone a blank check that disagrees with something to go out and start conducting their own wrong actions and acts of violence and illegal activities to pretty much say we're getting even. That's not how it works. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Timothy Bunnell, who puts in a 10. And Timothy said, longtime listener and first-time contributor, and take one from the chat, please.
And I thank you so much for the support, and thank you for supporting the channel for the first time and helping this thing to keep on rolling. And of course, we will make sure to give one from the live chat in your honor. So what do we got, Matthew?
And this live chat question goes to Levi Stratton, who said, did you see the October 15th youth protest in St. Pete, Russia? I personally didn't see it. I heard about it, but I didn't really see the pictures from it. Although it seems like worldwide, it seems like Generation Z is really starting to get wild. Like, I think in Madagascar, by the way, that coup was actually generally powered by the Gen Z crowd, based on what I've learned so far. So it looks like the youth are going berserk. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's a little bit wild that Gen Z is overthrowing governments everywhere, like in Nepal and Madagascar. I didn't hear about the one in St. Petersburg myself, but it is a wild sort of a trend that's starting to pop up these days. I would hope that that's not a trend that reaches its way to the United States. But I do thank you massively for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Connor Guartafiero, and he puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Connor, for that support. He said 60 Minutes talked about China trying to hack into the Littleton Mass Water Electrical Network back in 2023. And he believed that China would do similar hacks as they invade Taiwan to divert the U.S. 100%. Absolutely, they would. I'm sure that China probably is deep into Taiwan's systems. I would imagine that if China is knee deep in our electrical system and our electrical grid and also our water systems, and also if y'all haven't heard this report yet, China is literally attacking even local water outlets and also electrical stations. They are literally trying to hack into everything, not just the big ones, but also the small ones too. So China is going all out. Like they're trying to hack literally anything they can get their hands on. So I would imagine Taiwan, who knows what they've done to Taiwan, it's probably a lot. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to agree with that. That's definitely a tactic of the Chinese. In the modern day, cyber warfare is a tactic of every single nation on the planet that is advanced to any degree. If there is a war that breaks out, they are immediately trying to attack and take down the cyber infrastructure of the country they're at war with. So can guarantee you the Chinese would do that to Taiwan if they started to invade. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And big thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Sales Master Metals, who puts in a 10. He said, thank you for bringing like minds together in the channel, and democracy dies in darkness.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support. And I hope that we speak a great deal of reason on this channel. I'm sure a lot of people who listen realize that the reason why we don't really get heavy into politics is that we look at things pretty reasonably. And because of that, we don't really fall within any political group anyways, because to be in a political group these days, you kind of have to be fairly unreasonable. Like, you just have to view it very one-sidedly and not really look at everything in total. Because over the course of tonight, I think we've been called fascist and communists in different moments of the show, because we don't agree with the one side or the other on one thing or another, and it shows through enough, because we'll explain it in our own way with our own logic. And they don't like that, because it's either you just agree with everything just cause, even if it doesn't make any sense, or you're obviously the worst thing alive. So, you know, if you're a Republican, whoever you disagree with is a communist, and if you're a liberal, whoever you disagree with is clearly a Nazi or something like that. So I'm glad to know that we are neutral enough that we end up getting the ire of both sides pretty much every single night. And I got to thank you so much for supporting the channel and appreciating the fact that we are that apolitical that we pretty much get bad raps on pretty much every side on the political end. But still, a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Ryan H. And Ryan puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Ryan, for that support. He said, good evening to the Enforcer Matt, and Turkmenistan, rabbit hole, please.
Oh my God. That's a great one, actually. I thank you for the support. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the guy who was in charge of Turkmenistan just retained it as a Soviet republic, and he renamed the Communist Party of Turkmenistan to, I think it was like the Democracy Party of Turkmenistan. The first election they had in the country, he won it by 99.9%. The second election they had in the country, he won it by 99.98%. And then he declared himself president for life. The next guy who took charge of the country, who's in charge of it right now, he was actually a dentist. So he had like that Assad build going on. He was like a dentist and everything. And then he became the leader of the country. And they have done absolutely stupid stuff there. For one, the current guy, if I'm not mistaken, he claims he's magic or something. And he can do all kinds of magical feats. Actually, no, that was the last guy. The last guy was the guy who was magical. The current guy is, like, I'm not kidding, folks. The best way to explain Turkmenistan, like the current leader of it, it's like if he was General Aladdin from the movie Dictator. That is literally who he is, down to the T, like perfectly. There's no other way to put it. That guy is General Aladdin if he was real. He goes to sports events, he wins them all. Like Aladdin did, like the running tournament, Matthew. You remember where he had the pistol and anyone was running faster than him, he just shot him? Kind of like that.
Damn.
The entire city of Ashgabat is built out of white marble, and none of it has any real architectural sense. I mean, like, look at it. you can even see from here, it's like, what type of design is this? And it really has no design. Let me see if I can drop y'all down on a picture here to show y'all what it kind of looks like out here. This is what it looks like. And all of these buildings, by the way, folks, are clad with real white marble, like actual white marble. It's insane. Every single building in Ashgabat is like this. The whole city is abandoned. Practically nobody lives here because nobody is within the graces of the government enough, at least in large enough numbers, to live here. So most of this was built as a vanity project. Because of this,
I was gonna say I was gonna bring up another thing, but go ahead.
The whole city of Ashgabat was built as a vanity project, at least a modern one, and they have absolutely no freedom of the press. Press is pretty much removed. I don't think they have any operational. Oh yeah, by the way, I forgot. The only hospitals that exist in the country are in Ashgabat because the last guy who ran Ashgabat just completely deleted every hospital in the country and fired all of the staff and just said if anyone's sick, they can just come to Ashgabat and just left it at that. So there's no hospitals throughout all of Turkmenistan except for here in the capital. There is no press. If you say something that the government doesn't like, the police just come in the middle of the night, like the KGB would have, and just take you away to a prison camp or execute you. You're never heard from again, so nobody knows if they're dead or alive somewhere. It is a pretty wild place. They actually say that that Turkmenistan is as oppressive and has actually been argued by some to be even more oppressive than North Korea, which is a little bit unbelievable, but they're pretty close actually. But anyways, Matthew, what were you about to bring up?
Yeah, if you go to Turkmenistan, if someone's trying to go to hell, like for example, if somebody wants to go to hell, you go to Turkmenistan. They have the door to hell literally in the country. It's literally built into the ground. The Darvaza gas crater, which is apparently a result of a failed Soviet drilling attempt. This is it right here. This is called the door to hell, and it's like just a pit in the ground that has flames that never go out. So this thing always burns, and it's just burning gas basically constantly. So this pit right here is the door to hell. So that's a fun fact. If you want to find it, you just go there and you see it. But also, by the way, another thing I've heard as well, I've heard that there's a rumor that black cars, like the color black on cars, is totally banned in Ashgabat because the president is superstitious. So you can't even drive a black car. Also, they've banned a lot of art forms too. They banned opera, ballet, and other arts because they deemed it not to be compatible. Yeah, they deemed it not to be compatible with Turkmen culture. So they got rid of all that stuff. So honestly, it seems like kind of a wacky country, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if I'd ever want to see that.
It's extremely whack. The first guy who ran Turkmenistan as their dictator, he changed the words. He changed the word for bread to the name of his mother because he just wanted everyone to be reminded of his mother. He renamed all of the months of the year. One of the months was named after his mother. Another one was named after a dog that he really liked. And then also on top of that, if I remember correctly, the state television network just talks about how cool they all are. Like the leader, at least, the last one and the current one. I mean, it's really insane, honestly. I'm trying to think of all the different stuff that they've done in Turkmenistan that's just absolutely nuts.
They get the least amount of visitors, the least amount of tourists to pretty much any country on the planet. That's how little people actually want to go see this place. Like, I think, I'm not really sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think they get less visitors than North Korea, or it's either on par with North Korea. It's very low.
Yeah, nobody goes here. Like, nobody goes here ever. And also, I saw one guy, I think, who accidentally ended up in Ashgabat because a plane had a technical fault and it had to detour here, I think. And it was insane, like, the treatment they got immediately off the plane. Everyone was claimed, as soon as they landed, to be foreign spies, and they interrogated everyone from the plane for, like, 5 hours each. And then they told them all, you immediately have to get on a flight and leave here. And I was like, this is insane. I've never heard of this place. And that's what actually got me interested in Turkmenistan to look into it. And then there was a whole... Oh, by the way, the first leader of Turkmenistan, he actually was a little benevolent in a way, in that everyone's water, gas, and electricity bills in Turkmenistan were actually free. Like, they didn't have to pay for any of that, because the Turkmen government made so much money off of the natural gas sales that they have, that he just subsidized everyone's gas, electric, and water bills in their apartments. The second guy who's in charge right now, he got rid of that, because he ended it so that way he could build up enough money to just start building everything out of marble in Ashgabat. So now nobody gets to subsidize water, electricity, and gas anymore because Ashgabat's marble. That's literally the reason. Let me see if I can show you some other crazy stuff here from Ashgabat. Like this mall right here. This one. It's a really wild place, honestly. But anyways, with that, I hope that addresses that well, at least about Turkmenistan. It's kind of a smaller rabbit hole. I don't know a great deal about it, but it's an insane, wacky sort of place. I just saw someone in the chat say it's a Mickey Mouse country, and honestly, I'd agree with you. It's cartoonish nearly with how goofy it is. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Kyle Rocco, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Kyle, for that $10 support. He said, can you explain the difference between communism and fascism in terms of day-to-day operation? They seem both very similar to me, and in terms of how they actually function in the real world. Basically, because I actually studied this as my whole major in college. To sum it up in a really simple way, communism is basically equality through collectivism. That's the simplest way to put it. And fascism is power through nationalism. I guess you could best describe it that way simply. But they're very different. Fascism is generally about a cult of personality. For example, a dictator that generally holds all the power. And the dictator rallies the country around his ideology. So that's fascism. Communism is more about the economics. It's more about being a classless, stateless society where all the property and production are owned collectively. That's opposed to fascism, because in fascism, generally the corporations are in cahoots with the dictator, but there's still private property ownership in fascism, unlike communism. So that's basically it in a nutshell. But Enforcer, what say you?
If we took the Nazi Germans and the Soviet Union as they existed at the same time in the 1930s and 40s, the truth is that there really wasn't a lot of difference in living in either one of those countries on the day-to-day with how your daily life looked. The quality of life in Germany, however, was better than the Soviet Union, but that's just because historically living in Russia sucks. Like, there's just really no other way to put that. But beyond that, as far as the day-to-day, it's about the same. In the Soviet Union, all enterprises were operated by the state. In Germany, all enterprises had to answer to the Ministry of Labor, which pretty much ran the entirety of Germany's state industries, as well as private ones. Private ones generally had to get deference or some sort of approval from the Ministry of Labor, or I think it was like the Ministry of Verka. It was a really weird deal. Like it's their flag. They had their own flag. It was like a swastika on a cog, but I keep forgetting the exact name of that ministry, but it's like the Ministry of Labor. But they pretty much operated all of the industries inside of Nazi Germany. And like a lot of people don't understand this sort of a deal because everyone goes, oh, well, clearly that sounds like in Nazi Germany, there's at least some like autonomy to become like a businessman or something like that. Pretty much the same thing existed in the Soviet Union as well, because you could end up becoming a factory manager, which may as well have been like a little CEO. You get a lot more pay, you get better treatment, you live in a nicer apartment than everyone else for being a factory manager. So it might as well be the same sort of social structure. Every single one of them had party control down to the most basic element. In Germany, that the most basic element of the Nazi party was the Blockleiter, which is this guy who was like, he's pretty much the block leader, and he talks to all the people on his one block, and he pretty much keeps them in line. If anyone falls out of line of the ideology, he reports them, and then the Gestapo comes and gets them. In the Soviet Union, it's pretty much the same thing. In the Soviet Union, they had block leaders as well, that pretty much checked out their city blocks, made sure everyone was on board with the whole communist ideology deal. If you didn't agree with it, the NKVD came in the night and snatched you away just like the Gestapo would. Same sort of a system. Generally, you're pretty much dead on the nail. There really isn't a lot of difference on the day-to-day of living in a fascist or a communist system. The difference is the marketing behind that sort of a system. They both end up in the same way for a day-to-day life. Like if you're an average person and you wake up and live a 24-hour period in a society like that, it's almost the same. The difference is the packaging. The Soviets packaged, or the communists generally, but the Soviets are like the archetype for communism nowadays. The Soviets packaged it as, we are a classless society who does not view race, and we are all unified in the common purpose of improving the betterment of our peoples, of the Soviets. The Nazi Germans, on the other hand, which are the archetype of fascism, like pretty much the root fascism that a lot of people look at now, although really it was the Italians, but everyone looks at the Germans. If you look at their system, they say, we are a peoples united under the identity of the Germans, and we are removing all foreign influence of these different groups, the Britons, the Jews, and so on, to create a unified peoples that have really no differences amongst them, which is also quite interesting because Germans were socialist, and most fascist governments actually do implement socialist economic systems, which pretty much creates a classless system. And so the Nazi Germans also have a classless system, and they are looking for the betterment of their peoples, the German people, which is just the only people who existed in that system, while in the Soviet Union, they say it's all Soviets regardless of ethnicity, although the truth of it was the Russians above everyone else. So generally...
But really, though, the life in between a fascist system and also a communist system, they're actually day to day, they actually are much different, especially from an economic standpoint. Because in a communist society, the government heavily subsidizes things like, for example, your common utilities, like electrical and things like that. You still would have an electrical bill, and you would have these utility bills, but they're heavily subsidized by the state, and that dramatically reduces the cost of the electrical or the utility bill. So that's one thing there. Also, the state owned most of the housing inside of, like, for example, the Soviet Union. So most people would pay like a little token rent, like a little small rent amount. I think it was like a small little percent of their income to cover basic maintenance, but they wouldn't pay rent, as in like the rent that we're familiar with in a democratic country like the United States. So from an economic perspective, it was much different because in a fascist society, you still had to pay all your bills. It was barely subsidized by the state, and it was much different from communism. But there's a lot of economic differences between the two, mainly on just that aspect.
I don't know. I think in Nazi Germany at some point, housing was almost state operated, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think so. I'll do some looking real quick and find out though, but I don't think so.
Because in the Soviet Union, I know how the Soviet structure worked for sure. I'm not really sure how the Nazi structure worked, but in the Soviet Union, I don't believe there was any rent at all. All housing was operated by the state. There was none that was privately operated, and the rent was non-existent because the apartment was allocated to you based off of your job. And if you got a job, the apartment and housing came along with it because of the Soviet Union's law of a right to work that everyone must be employed, and it's actually criminalized if you were unemployed.
So basically, the short answer is, in Germany during that time, before World War II, most Germans still owned or rented their homes through private landlords or companies. They never abolished private property, unlike communism. In Soviet society, it was abolished. That was the whole tenet of communism, was the private property. It was abolished completely, and the state owned everything. So you'd simply be in state subsidized housing, and it would pay a small token amount of rent to stay there, basically to cover basic maintenance and to put it toward a common pot. But in Germany, though, the only thing the state generally did is they did have rent controls, and also they did generally control who built what where. But that's like, even the U.S. does that. We have planning laws and things like that, so there's nothing different really there. So no, it was very different. People still paid full rent prices, and that was not subsidized inside of Germany.
Interesting. So actually, it appears, to correct my answer to you there, I was actually wrong on that. At least on the economic side, it is slightly different, although Germany is Nazi Germany, at least during that period, was socialist and did largely present itself as a classless society, as according to their theory at the time. Germans are superior, but Germans are also all equal to each other. Therefore, there's not really any reason to have a class, which was a larger pushing element of them. You can find proof of that in the Wilhelm Gustloff, which was a cruise ship that the Germans built that was classless. There was no class system on board. You can also find that in the Ministry of Labor's leisure towns or leisure zones that also were classless as well, and just provided middle class amenities to all, whether you were low class or high class, which was provided to all of the workers of Germany. So a very similar system there to that of the Soviet Union, but still different to some regard. But as far as living under a government like that, as far as the ideology is concerned, it is exactly the same with the same level of enforcement. You have to toe their party line, no matter what it is, to the T. And if you're ever suspicioned of falling out of line of that, both of them have enforcement elements. In Nazi Germany, that would have been the Gestapo. Inside of Russia, that would have been the NKVD, later the KGB, that would literally come to your place in the middle of the night so that way no one would know what would happen. They knock on your door and they tell you you're under arrest, you're coming with us right now, and off you went. In Germany to a camp, in Russia to a gulag. Later, that was changed to prisons, and gulags were generally discontinued after Stalin's time, although they still existed to some extent throughout the rest of the Soviet Union, just not in such a large number. So I hope that does address it the best we can. We actually had to clarify that answer there and correct a misassessment that I had. But a big thanks to you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Andrew Honeycutt, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Andrew. He said, the Yanarmia is a Russian youth military organization that historically parallels with another organization. And this is very disturbing and a sign of a dying regime. Can you address it, please?
And can you reread that one again really quickly?
Yeah, he said the Yanarmia is a Russian youth military organization that has historical parallels with another organization. And this is very disturbing and a sign of a dying regime. And can we address it?
I would have to say that it is fairly disturbing, but generally groups like that exist in most totalitarian states. Like in the Soviet Union, there was the Young Pioneers. In China, there was the Revolutionary Guard. It is a fairly similar sort of a system that you would find in most. So I would actually have to say it's concerning, but not at all off-key for a dictatorship like Russia. But a big thanks to you for the support, and I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Russ Rizzo, who puts in a 10. And Russ said, democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power, where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself, and that is fascism, ownership of government, from Franklin Roosevelt, 1938. Honestly, I would say, let me read that one more time. Democracy not safe. If that's referring to, for example, corporations, I think that's what it's referring to, if I'm understanding that properly. I would say there's always a risk to corporations consolidating, because obviously if you have large companies that carry a lot of weight and generate a lot of revenue, they obviously have power because they have a lot of money in their bank accounts. So they have power because of that. So I would say that is a huge danger. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I would agree that is quite a huge danger. I wouldn't necessarily say that's fascist. I'd actually say that hypercapitalism can end up being a threat to our system. And hypercapitalism is as dangerous as any other form of an extreme. But I do thank you for the support and help with this channel to keep it running. But I'd actually have to disagree with FDR's quote there a little bit. And also, one other thing, I also saw someone said something interesting. I need to find it. I can find it. Let's see. Oh, let's see here. How many people? Dang, why in the world did it disappear? Oh, wait a minute. Someone said, actually, I found it. Someone said, well, Americans agree with socialist concepts to some degrees, like fire departments and so on. I wouldn't say that that's all socialist. Those are just civil services, which have existed since the dawn of time, and therefore can't be socialist because they've literally existed through all of history before there was even a concept of socialism. It is always expected in a social contract with a governing body of some sort, which always exists in the social contract, that the citizenry are provided some sort of civil services and some sort of protections and order by a government, and in exchange those people work and then give some form of dues, usually in the form of taxes, to the government for the upkeep of that contract, and also generally towards some sort of a greater growth or benefit to everyone at large. So I wouldn't really say that the provision of fire departments and civil services is socialist, because even back in the times of medieval ages, the citizens of a city corporation like the City of London would always pay some sort of an excise or a tax to the City Corporation of London for them to be able to build up a treasury, so that way they could pay for civil services like fountains for water or city walls for common defense. And I wouldn't really say that any form of those civil services, or modern civil services for that matter, really fall under socialism. That's just more so an expected civil service as a part of a default social contract, at least in my take, in my opinion. But Matthew, what do you think?
I would say every government, even the United States, has elements of all kinds of different governance systems. We obviously have elements of socialism in our country, but they're just mere elements of it. We are nowhere near a true socialist country, not even close. by any means. And honestly, we should not strive for that either, because while there are certain good positive aspects to every form of governance, even communism, there are good little bits and pieces of it. The entire system as a whole of communism doesn't work. It's been proven. And also, we have not seen a true socialist governance system ever actually function in reality. It's like utopian ideology. It sounds great on paper, but in reality, though, it just doesn't work. I'm not saying that capitalism is perfect, but at the same time, though, name a better system. I personally haven't seen it. And also, they can't stand the test of time. And while some people may criticize capitalism and say, oh, well, the United States has massive problems today. Corporations are gaining way too much power. They're influencing politics, and they're basically forming an oligarchy within our country. I would say you have a legitimate concern, but just because there's issues does not mean it's time to throw out the entire system. It simply needs to be reformed, and I think we need strong reform. So that's what I think.
And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Snowy, who puts in a 6. And Snowy said, you guys spend 6 days per week on the channel. And what are actually your future plans, family-wise? And could you combine this with a partner or having kids? Damn, that's a deep question right there, hitting me like a ton of bricks. But honestly, I'll be honest with you. We are basically married to this thing. I'll be perfectly honest. We spend a hell of a lot of time on it. I look at it as basically like a startup business is what I look at it like. So I justify spending as many hours as I do on it by looking at it like that. If you're a business owner, you might as well expect to work around the clock. And that's basically what we do. But I obviously do have plans, family plans one day. I'm not planning on sacrificing my entire life, personal life, just for the channel. But at the same time, though, I am very dedicated to making sure this channel succeeds at the same time. So I'll have to see when that comes around, actually. But Enforcer, what say you?
We fight and die to keep this channel running every day, and it really does take up a lot of our time every week. But at the same time, I do have a plan, because this is a great thing that we do, but at the same time, folks, I'm sure many of y'all understand, we also have to live our lives, and once a year goes by, you never get that year back. So I'm eventually planning, a lot like Enforcer Matt, to get married and have a family, because that's one of the big goals in life for myself, just on a personal level, is to actually get married and have a family, and because it would seem like a great thing. And there's of course troubles and tribulations like any sort of normal interactions with a family that will happen as a result of that. It's not always roses every single minute of every day, but at the same time, it's something I really want to do. It's a big thing of mine, so eventually I'm going to get to that. So I'll have to just figure out how in the world to balance the two, the best way to put it. But still, a big thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
This one goes to No Please, who puts in a 5. And they said, is it not fair to say if there were innocent Venezuelan fishermen, there would be an outcry from their government over the death of the innocents?
You actually would think that that would be the case. Nobody really seems to cry for any of these guys when they get blown up, like, truth be told. I haven't heard anyone in Venezuela being outraged by it. I haven't heard the Venezuelan government saying that they're outraged by it. I haven't seen anything, as a matter of fact, of any outrage, and I've seen some people point that out in the chat tonight, and I think that is a fairly decent lay to the claim that a lot of these people probably are involved in the cartel, because nobody's talking about them from Venezuela as if the innocent have been slain. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Good point, by the way. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to John Murray, who puts in the 5. And John said, crazy idea. Don't you think the CIA would be feeding targeting data to the Navy for this purpose?
Most likely, that's what I would assume. But I do thank you for the support, and I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Plazoth, who puts in a 3, and also Dan Brooks, who puts in a 2. And thank you very much, Plazoth and Dan, for that support, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And we also have a 2 from Squirrel, and Squirrel said, for acorn catapults.
Oh, and thank you so much for the support, Squirrel. I'm still on the Squirrel jokes. I love those, actually. Those are pretty good. And I got to thank you huge for the support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from Split X, who put in that 2. It said, Russian soldiers reached Leontovsky right now.
And I thank you for the support and sharing that with us. We'll look into that after the show. But a big thanks to you once again, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Cody Fritz, who puts in a 2. And thank you very much, Cody, as well. He said, Matt's short war video intro here one night, it slapped. And also, Cody Fritz, I hate to break it to you, but that's actually a YouTube preset intro. When you do a video premiere, and by the way, I've been recently doing video premieres quite a lot for the short war videos. They let you pick from a list of pre-developed intro cards for that. So I usually pick the one called Dramatic, which is the one that you watch. I think it's pretty sick. Honestly, I think it's pretty good, but it's nothing we can use here on the normal stream, sadly. But Enforcer, what say you?
Thank you so much for support. Matthew is correct on that. Those are default intros. And we spent so much time making this one. Please don't hate it. It's good. I tried. But still, a big thanks to you once again for support. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and it is now time to jump into our live chat questions proper and our Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight, we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Erbo Garbo, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush Kopioteryx, Sire, and Brian Blairstown. They said the LSA Morse code decipher says, now if we look at this all sensibly, we already knew the U.S. was in there. LOL. Lol. LLT LSA.
Lol. And and that's the sound of money, and y'all got that dead on the nail. That is the Morse code message of the night. I gotta say, y'all have been continuing to get that correct for thousands and thousands of days, and I gotta congratulate y'all for that, because the Least Army Single Corps has never missed a message so far, and continues to let us know of the Morse code messages, which speak more about the tales of Captain Crack Sparrow. And so with that, a big congratulations to y'all once again, and with that, we are going to be moving on into the live chats. Unfortunately, folks, due to time constraints, we will only be able to get 3 live chat questions to round out our stream for the night. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Mystical, who said, I have a question. Oh, good. They said, the narcotics on the boats that were destroyed and after they were airstruck, apparently they dissolve into the ocean. And would that affect the ocean life? That sounds like a good alibi for these people on these boats with like the 4 1,000 horsepower motors like strapped to the back of it. They could say, that's why we need those massive motors, because you see, the fish, they absorb the narcotics. And it turned out the narcotics were a stimulant, and the fish that normally swam at 20 miles an hour suddenly sped up to about 500 miles an hour. So that's why we need these massive outboards. But Enforcer, what say you?
Yar, that whale be overdosing on me fentanyl, my boy. Like, man, yar. But beyond that, I'd have to say, that's a possibility, actually. That's actually something I haven't thought about. But in concentrated doses near to the site of the sinking, that actually could affect the wildlife, maybe even kill them. So that's actually a little bit wild there. I've never thought of it that way. I think we need the EPA to get on that whole deal and see if that's actually healthy for the environment or not, because that certainly can affect the trout population, without a doubt. But still, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
Can you just imagine, like, for example, if there's like if there's like sharks in the vicinity or something like that, and they get like some absorption of that junk that comes from the boats, which is just straight up poison. Those sharks, I could see them jumping out of the water, like clapping fins and stuff like that, and like tweaking out and stuff like that. Oh man, I'll tell you what, those sharks, I tell you what, that's probably what happened to Jabberjaw. You know how some of those like illicit substances cause you to have like jaw problems and stuff like that, like gritting the jaw and like stuff like that. I don't know what they call that, like coke jaw or something like that, like the people that have that problem and stuff. That's what they call him, Jabberjaw. That's why they probably called him that.
You ever heard of Sharknado, boy? Get ready for Cokenado. Oh, buddy, here they come. Honestly, I'm not going to lie, folks. Thinking about coked out sea life is actually pretty funny. It should not be, but it is pretty funny to just think about as a concept. Also, I got to say, folks, wouldn't you hate to run into a coked up swordfish in the middle of the sea? That would be a terrible thing to run up into. But anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that well. Quite an interesting brain exercise there, thinking about coked up sea life, but I think there's a possibility of that, actually. Man, Jim said, this tuna tastes different. Oh my god, man, this tuna is really getting me hyped. I feel awake already. It's maybe stop eating the tuna. But anyways, with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to the Commodore, who said, how can Russia threaten NATO when they can't even advance further into Ukrainian territory, and aren't they spent as a military force?
They pretty much are spent as a military, but once again, it's not about winning. It's just about getting us into a situation where they're either going to nuke us or we're going to nuke them. That's really what we're kind of looking at. So it doesn't really matter if they're having to win a conventional war or not. It really just matters that they're forcing us into a nuclear standoff at that point. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we are on to the final question of the night. And so who is like the last person to put in the lucky last question of the night?
And this one goes to Scott Sesher, who said, do you think the CIA is really there in Venezuela to try to steal the Nobel Peace Prize?
Oh my God. Oh man, I actually heard he's already getting nominated again for more Nobel Peace Prizes. I think that guy from Argentina gave him some plaque saying that he nominated for the Nobel. I don't know why this is such a big obsession. I mean, honestly, I don't even get why people really want the medal. What does it change? It doesn't do anything for anyone.
I heard an explanation that actually made kind of sense. I don't really care about the Nobel Peace Prize, me personally, but the explanation I've heard is that they nominated the current woman in Venezuela for acts done in 2024 that led to peace. So the word on the street from someone out there that really wants the prize is that they nominated her for 2024, and there's been so much stuff that's been done in 2025 that it's time to make sure that the 2025 prize gets put toward the rightful owner. They said, sir, 2025, it's a big year. They said, a big year for Nobel. They said, Nobel Peace Prize, a prize for peace, noble peace. That's what they say.
A lot of people have been talking about those bell ringers, those stupid homework things that you have to do when you go into high school and you sit down at the desk and the teacher gives you a bell ringer. And I always thought that those things were really stupid. I was like, I just sat down. Why am I doing a math quiz? Tell me why. I do not understand. But beyond that, one thing that I will say about this whole Nobel is that I have no bells in my hotels. That kind of rhymes a little bit. You walk into the hotel, there's no bellhops. There's none of those. I don't even know why they called them bellhops. Did they hop over a bell? Did they ever hop over a bell? I never saw one do that. They said, sir, the name, it doesn't make sense. And I said, it doesn't make sense at all. But one thing I will say is that Javier, he's down there in Argentina, and he nominated me for a Nobel. And I gotta be honest with y'all, his stock market has Nobels going off because it's about to collapse. We're trying to bail him out. We gave him another $20 billion today. We said we don't have enough money for Ukraine, but we have $40 billion for Argentina. How did we do that? I don't know. Call it magic money, the way it just appears like that, like Monopoly money. Speaking of Monopoly, we have been allowing some companies to get strategic holdings inside of the United States. Some people have been looking into it, looking into the cameras, looking deep into people's private lives, invasion of privacy, but we call that nowadays security. We call it security. It's a great, wonderful thing. By the way, everyone, I don't know if y'all have heard about this, but the Atlantic is a very interesting place. I've actually been talking to the Secretary of Health, and he told us that if we dip all of the children up to their ankles in the Atlantic Ocean, they will all be free of the Tylenol syndrome, which I thought was a really crazy suggestion. I don't know how they're all supposed to get in the Atlantic, but we'll make it work eventually. Also, by the way, another side note, everyone is freaking about that oil base in Qatar. You are fake news. There's nothing to worry about. They're just going to Idaho. They wanted to see the potatoes. They wanted to see where Five Guys gets their fries from. They get them from Idaho. And I gotta be honest with y'all, I don't know why Five Guys cost so much. We brought down the price of eggs, but Five Guys has been skyrocketing as a result. It's like $50 for a hamburger from Five Guys. And they give you these shitty fries. They are really greasy, and they sit at the bottom of the bag, and they're really cold by the time you get them. And some of them are crunchy. It's like there's nothing inside. It's like nothing but fry. And you go, turn off the fryer, and it's just terrible. It's terrible. You got to stop frying these things. They are fried to a crisp. It's terrible, honestly. Really bad. But beyond that, everyone, this is actually the end of the show. Many of y'all may not believe it. Many of y'all are very sad. Some people have said, sir, this is the greatest show that's ever run on YouTube. And I'd have to agree. There's just none better. People have been saying that it's the greatest show that's ever run since audio was recorded, since videos were recorded. Everyone said it's better than Steamboat Willie and that Walt Disney who made the Mickey Mouse. I don't know who the hell that guy is, but he created Disney World. And why make bad when good? It's all right, everyone. It's all right. Don't worry. worry. Don't freak out. It's all good. Everything's under control. But beyond that, everyone, I thank you all so much for watching. We've had a great viewership here tonight. 106,000 people. A lot of folks are really impressed with that, myself included. Wow, that's a lot of people. And we had, what do you want to call it? 16.2 thousand people here tonight. That's a nice crowd. We bring in big crowds. Everyone goes, wow, that's a big crowd. That's a great crowd, incredible crowd. But a big thanks to all of y'all once again for watching, and we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of news from around the world. If you have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to have y'all. You really would. We'd love to have y'all. And, of course, we will see you all tomorrow. And if there's a shortwave video to be made, I, the greatest, the enforcer, will be making the video. Some people have never said the videos have been better. Sarah, the video can't be better. But beyond that, we will see you all then. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe. Long live the East Spring Army. Long live Slavic Ukraine or whatever. And long live the Republic. Thank you, everyone.
And with that, folks, thank you all for joining us once again tonight. And a big shout out to the 106,000 people that were here by the very end of the stream. And we will see you all tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern on our next nightly war news stream and on the short war video tomorrow if there is enough news to cover. But with that, folks, thank you all for joining us, and Slava Ukraine. Hear 'em, Slava. Get some rest and good night.